They say it takes a village to raise a child, but in the case of Indianapolis teenager Sylvia Likens, it took a village to incite her gruesome death. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, to parents Lester Cecil Likens and Elizabeth Betty Francis. Sylvia was the middle child, being born between two sets of twins, Daniel and Diana, who were 2 years older than her, and Benny and Jenny, who were 1 year younger. The Boone County family moved often and experienced many financial hardships. Lester, having only an 8th grade education, had to resort to working many menial jobs to care for his family, including a laundry route and factory labor. Betty also joined Lester in selling food and beverages for traveling carnivals. It was this job that would lead to the torment and inevitable death of 16-year-old Sylvia. Sylvia, or Cookie as her friends called her, has been described as a confident, friendly, and pretty young girl, although she didn't smile often, due to a missing front tooth from play fighting with her brothers. She also happily contributed to the family by babysitting, running errands, and doing chores for friends and neighbors. Sylvia also made it a point to take younger sister Jenny under her wing, as she suffered from polio, leaving her quite frail. Jenny's legs were especially affected by the disease, causing her to have a notable limp and forcing her to wear a steel brace on one leg. On July 3, 1965, their mother Betty was arrested and jailed for shoplifting, leaving Lester to fend for himself with the children. Older sister Diana was married and living on her own. Daniel and Benny were sent off to stay with their grandparents, which left Sylvia and Jenny needing to be cared for. Lester did not want to take the 2 young girls to work at the carnival with him due to safety concerns, most likely having to do with Jenny's unstable condition. It was at this time Lester became acquainted with Gertrude Banisowski. She introduced herself to him as Mrs. Wright, perhaps trying to maintain a modicum of decorum to hide the fact she had her youngest child outside of wedlock. Her daughters Paula and Stephanie knew the Likens girls from studying together at Arsenal Technical High School. With time ticking and money on the line, Lester agreed to have Gertrude board the girls in her East New York Street home for a mere $20 a week, despite knowing little to nothing about the Banisowskis. This run-of-the-mill decision would be one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Gertrude Nadine Banisowski was born on September 19, 1929. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches and was described as haggard and underweight, as she only weighed about 100 pounds. In 1945, she dropped out of school at the ripe age of 16 to marry police deputy John Banisowski. Although he was violent and physically abusive to Gertrude, she remained married to him for 10 years and bore him 4 children: Paula, age 17, Stephanie, age 15, John, age 12, and Marie, age 11. Less than a year after her divorce, she married a man named Edward Guthrie, who left her after a short 3-month stint due to not liking her children being around all the time. After her second divorce, she foolishly returned to her first husband John Banisowski and had 2 more children: Shirley, age 10, and James, age 8. They stayed together for 7 more years and divorced for a final time in 1963. Just weeks after her third divorce, she began an affair with a 20-year-old man named Dennis Lee Wright, who also took a turn in physically abusing Banisowski. She became pregnant with her youngest child, Dennis Jr., age 1, and was quickly abandoned by Dennis Sr., leaving her to raise all 7 children on her own. Banisowski, who now suffered from clinical depression, had to rely on first husband John's infrequent checks and performing odd jobs such as sewing, cleaning, babysitting, and doing laundry to make ends meet. To make matters worse, her oldest daughter Paula fell pregnant by a middle-aged married man. Banisowski's health, as a result of 3 failed marriages, becoming destitute, and the news of her pregnant daughter, declined dramatically. Her depression, among other unidentified ailments, caused her to abandon basic self-care. Her hairline began to recede, her eyes grew sunken, and she now had an overall cadaverous appearance. In desperation for a caregiver, Lester Likens ignored her physical shortcomings. However, it was pure ignorance for him to not inspect the Banisowski home, which was covered in layers of dirt and grime, missing a stove and microwave, had only enough eating utensils for 3 people, insufficient beds, and a pantry with only bread and crackers. Shortly after the 4th of July holiday, Sylvia and Jenny Likens officially moved into the Banaszewski home, where Gertrude promised to treat the girls like one of her own. Lester advised Betty would join him at the carnival upon her release from jail, and they would be returning for the girls in November of the same year. However, Sylvia would never make it to November. At first, the girls' stay at the Banaszewski home was ordinary. They attended social functions with the Banaszewski children, sang along to records together, and even attended church with them on Sunday. Sylvia was happy to help around the home and earn her keep. However, it seemed oldest daughter Paula had a bone to pick with Sylvia. Perhaps she was jealous of her appearance and personality, or perhaps she was upset with herself for falling pregnant with a married man and decided to take her anger out on Sylvia. Either way, the clash between the two teenagers was evident, and is what seemed to be the spark that set off the explosive events that would soon take place. Initially, Lester's $20 payment arrived on time, as promised. A few weeks later, the check from Likens failed to arrive on time, causing Gertrude to become irate. Jenny would testify in later trials that Banaszewski, as a result of the failed payment, laid the girls down across her bed with their skirts and underwear around their ankles and beat them. "I took care of you two bitches for a week for nothing," Gertrude yelled. The very next day the check arrived, but Pandora's malicious box had already been opened. Despite the beating being completely unwarranted and unnecessary, the Likens girls did not mention the incident to anyone, possibly due to fear of further repercussions. However, beatings became more volatile with each late payment, as Banaszewski began using other instruments, such as ex-husband John's 3-inch wide police belt and a 1/4-inch thick paddle. Paula, taking advantage of the situation, would go out of her way to instigate further punishment upon the girls. She claimed the girls embarrassed the family by eating too much at the church function, knowing her mother would react abhorrently. On another occasion, Gertrude began interrogating Sylvia about her experience with boys when she mentioned to Paula and Stephanie she had a boyfriend back in California, where her family stayed previously. Banaszewski then told the girls if they did anything with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby, and then proceeded to kick Sylvia in the genitals. Paula seized the opportunity to vent her own pregnant frustrations and joined in the chastising by knocking Sylvia onto the floor, telling her she wasn't even fit to sit in a chair. It was from that moment on, Sylvia would be required to ask permission to sit on any chair. Gertrude continued to pursue the notion that Sylvia would be having a baby, commenting on her weight and suggesting her stomach was growing. She claimed Sylvia was ruining her physical appearance and began depriving her of food, or forcing her to eat spoiled food from the trash. As further punishment, during one family dinner, Gertrude had a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Leaper force-feed overloaded hot dogs to Sylvia until she regurgitated. She then forced her to scoop the vomit and eat it. Shortly after, the Likens' parents paid a visit to the girls, but once again due to fear, the abuse went unmentioned. Now mid-August, the focus and abuse was almost entirely upon Sylvia. Younger sister Jenny would not be subject to punishment, as long as she followed Banaszewski's rules and participated in the mistreatment of Sylvia. Gertrude threatened Jenny with similar treatment if she notified anyone of what was going on in the home. By this time, many of the neighborhood children also became privy to the torment Sylvia was enduring at the Banaszewski home. Instead of notifying trusted adults or officials, they too began participating in the exploitation of Sylvia. As a way of retaliation, Sylvia went to school and started a rumor that Paula and Stephanie were prostitutes. Once word got around, it was Stephanie's boyfriend Coy Randolph Hubbard who would take matters into his own hands, brutally attacking Likens, banging her head against the wall and slamming her to the ground. Paula beat Sylvia with such brute force, she broke her own wrist, and would later use the cast on her wrist to further beat her. After this incident, Coy and several of his friends would begin to frequent the Banaszewski's home with the encouragement of Gertrude to continue berating Sylvia. They would use her as a practice dummy for violent judo maneuvers and mutilate her body with sharp objects, burn her with cigarettes, and grievously injure her genitals. Gertrude took things a step further and ordered Sylvia to strip naked in front of everyone and forced her to penetrate herself with a glass soda bottle. On October 5, 1965, Parents Lester and Becky visited the girls at the Banaszewski home, where they claimed they saw no visible signs of abuse or distress. However, it may have been due to Gertrude's preparation, rehearsing, and threatening of the girls that didn't set off any alarms in the unknowing parents. Banaszewski made sure to stay in their presence at all times, to remain in control. Once they left, not knowing it would be the last time they'd see their middle child alive, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and stated, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now they're gone." Eventually, Gertrude forbade Sylvia from attending school, most likely due to the physical battering and the fear of someone noticing. Despite not being able to go to school, Sylvia went along with her sister Jenny and younger Banaszewski daughter Marie to the local park. They miraculously ran into their older sister Diana, but unfortunately, their cries fell on deaf ears as she believed the girls were over-exaggerating the situation. She did, however, give Sylvia a sandwich when she mentioned she was hungry. Marie reported the sandwich back to her mother, who in turn accused Likens of being gluttonous and proceeded to choke and bludgeon her alongside Paula. They then took frazzled Sylvia to the bathtub, where they gave her a scalding hot bath to cleanse her of her sins, while also repeatedly banging her head against the wall as she was in and out of consciousness. Finally, someone in the community decided to take a stand after witnessing a clearly injured Sylvia. The father of local neighborhood boy, Michael John Monroe, reported seeing Likens with open sores and bruises all over her entire body to the high school she had been forbidden to return to. The school nurse decided to visit the home, but Gertrude accused the girl of refusing to practice personal self-care, being a terrible influence upon the Banaszewski clan, and running away as she was out of control. Without further investigation and verification of Sylvia's whereabouts, the school closed the incident report. It seemed like no one was going to rescue Sylvia, and the abuse only continued to escalate. Now that she was home from school at all times, it left more time for her to be tortured, beaten, starved, refused water, sexually assaulted, lacerated, and burned. She was also refused permission to use the restroom, leaving her with no choice but to wet and soil herself, which then resulted in becoming permanently incontinent. As though through fault of her own, the Likens girl would be punished for her involuntary expelling of bodily fluids. The Banaszewskis tied her naked body to the railing of the basement stairs, leaving her feet barely touching the ground. They also began charging the neighborhood kids 5 cents apiece to enter their basement and take part in her mutilation. Once they were done with badgering Sylvia for the day, they would restrain, gag her, and give her more hot, scalding baths. They would finish the sick ritual by then rubbing salt into her terribly wounded body before throwing her back in the basement. As if these monstrous acts were not enough, on October 23, 1965, Gertrude yet again decided to take things a step further. She forced the severely injured and nude Sylvia to the kitchen, where she claimed her presence left a negative mark on her children. "You branded my children, so now I'm going to brand you," she stated, as she heated a needle and proceeded to carve the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," on her stomach. Halfway through the carving, Banaszewski handed the needle to one of the neighborhood boys, 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, and directed him to finish what she referred to as the tattoo. After this absolutely disgusting display, it became apparent to Gertrude that Sylvia may not be able to withstand much more of this. Instead of ceasing the actions, she decided to force Sylvia to write a letter to her parents, explaining the state of her appearance in the event she would finally succumb to her wounds and pass away. In the letter intended to mislead the Likens, Sylvia wrote she ran away from the Banaszewski home with a group of local boys who took turns engaging in sexual relations and then tortured and beat her profusely. After writing the letter, Gertrude threw her back in the basement and offered her crackers to eat. Upon refusing to eat the crackers, she was beaten again by Gertrude and John Banaszewski. On October 25th, Sylvia overheard Gertrude and John discussing how they should get rid of her, for good. In a last-ditch attempt, Likens made her way to the front door to try and escape, but was quickly caught by Gertrude, who dragged the girl away from the front door. Coy Hubbard, who was present at the time, helped Gertrude beat Sylvia with a curtain rod until she was rendered unconscious and threw her back in the basement. Sylvia spent the majority of that evening yelling as loud as she could, so perhaps the neighbors would be alerted and either come to her rescue or contact the police, neither of which happened. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia Likens was completely incoherent, not being able to speak or move properly. Gertrude attempted to feed Likens, but threw her to the floor when she became frustrated with her lack of motor skills. Paula began threatening her to stand up, but she was unable to, and instead defecated on herself. John Jr. decided to clean her by retrieving the garden hose and spraying her, while laughing. Likens began making her way to the basement stairs to escape, but collapsed before making it anywhere near the steps. Around 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs paid a visit to the basement and decided to help Stephanie Banisewski take Sylvia a warm bath and dress her in new clothes as instructed by her mother. Instead of returning her to the basement, they laid her on a mattress in one of the bedrooms as Sylvia muttered her last words, "I wish Daddy was here." Stephanie attempted to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, despite Gertrude yelling that she was faking her death. She ran to her lifeless body, striking her over and over, yelling, "Faker, faker," in an attempt to wake her up. When she realized she was truly gone, she told Richard Hobbs to call the police from a local payphone. When police arrived around 6:30 p.m., they found Sylvia's mutilated, extremely underweight corpse and a nervous Gertrude forcing the letter she had written in their hands, explaining that the teenager arrived at the home that way, and she attempted to doctor her back to health before she sadly passed away. Jenny Likens whispered to one of the officers, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." After hearing Jenny's story, police immediately arrested Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, John Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs on murder charges. All participants were held without bail pending trial. A few days later, on October 29th, 5 neighborhood children, Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Sisko, had also been arrested for participating in causing injury to Sylvia. However, the children were released to their parents under subpoena to appear as witnesses in the upcoming murder trial. Gertrude Banisewski, oldest daughter, Paula, son, John Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs were all tried and convicted. On May 19, 1966, Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, despite trying to plead insanity. After serving only 19 years for her crime, Gertrude was released in December 1985. Paula was found guilty of second-degree murder and also sentenced to a life term at the Indiana Women's Prison, alongside her mother. However, a retrial on August 5, 1971, gave Paula the opportunity to plead guilty to a lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, reducing her sentence from life to about 2 years, leading to her release in 1972. John, Hubbard, and Hobbs were found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 to 21 years, but were all released after only 2 years on February 27, 1968, for good behavior. It doesn't seem the punishments fit the crime, and the fact that not one of them completed their full sentence is utterly sickening. Sylvia Marie Likens was only in the Banisewski household for a short 3 months, but an autopsy revealed over 150 wounds, including several burns, scald marks, eroded peeled skin, severe malnutrition, bruising, and extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her genitals were so poorly beaten, it was almost swollen shut. Her kidneys were severely injured, her fingernails were broken backwards, and her lips were barely attached to her face. The official cause of death given by Dr. Arthur Keeble was a subdural hematoma and shock, complicated by malnourishment. Sylvia's tragic death, though not justified through the futile time served by those charged, did have an impact on Indiana laws and laws across the nation that would save other children from experiencing the same fate. The Indiana mandated reporter law states that all members of the public have a legal obligation to report any suspected abuse or neglect, and these allegations must be thoroughly investigated by officials. But what if people made the choice to stop matters before things escalated with Sylvia? What if officials didn't take Gertrude Banisewski's word and looked more closely as to what was happening? What if neighbors didn't ignore Sylvia's cries for help, There are a myriad of what-ifs, but no question asked will bring back Sylvia. Her death will always be considered one of Indiana's most heinous crimes. Due to the nature of the crimes and disturbing photos shared in this True Crime Collector video,
it seems to me that you're suggesting that had the police done their job, had they followed the leads, had they really been on your case prior to April 2nd, 1988, they would have caught you, and some of this suffering could have been prevented.
Maybe not caught me. Scared me off, maybe. Prevented things from happening after how? Definitely.
In a way, do you wish they had?
Yes.
viewer discretion is highly advised. Kidnapping and captivity, abuse and assault, physical and erotic torture, all atrocities committed by one sadistic freak who is now known as the Kansas City Butcher. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born on January 31, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, to Robert Andrew Berdella Sr. and Mary Louise Berdella. 7 years later, the couple bore a second son, Daniel. The family regularly attended Sunday Mass, as their Italian father was a devout Catholic. The Berdella boys also attended religion classes, and Robert Jr. was deemed an intelligent child, though he struggled socially with the other children. Perhaps it was due to his speech impairment and thick glasses, which often left him to be the brunt of jokes and bullying. Robert Sr. was known to abuse his sons, both emotionally and physically, subjecting them to countless beatings, usually with a leather strap. Robert Sr. regularly showed favoritism towards younger brother Daniel, as he more closely fit his ideal of what a son should be, popular and athletic. It was during Robert's adolescent years he came to the realization that he was homosexual. However, knowing how his immediate family would react and being fearful of his father's rage, he kept his sexuality a secret. It wasn't until he was in his later teens that his secret began to have a violent emotional impact on him. He would have irrational bouts of aggression and was particularly harsh and scornful towards females. Though his behavior was odd, he graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School in 1967 with exceptional grades. He moved on to Kansas City Art Institute, where he wanted to pursue his dream of becoming a professor. However, during his second year of college, he fell prey to a group of students who engaged in using and selling drugs. It was around this time he added alcohol to his regular diet. He also took his eccentric behavior to an extreme by decapitating ducks and experimenting with drugs on dogs shamelessly in front of others. His newfound drug career was cut short when he was arrested at age 19 for selling methamphetamines to an undercover cop. He pleaded guilty, but was only put on a 5-year probation due to it being a first offense. A short month after his arrest and release, he was arrested again for possession of marijuana and LSD. This time, he spent 5 days in jail, but was released due to insufficient evidence for a conviction. By 1969, Robert decided to leave the Kansas City Art Institute after becoming angry with his professors and administrators for reprimanding his outlandish decisions and behaviors. At this point, he was openly gay, but decided to use this sense of freedom with male prostitutes, drug addicts, criminals, and runaways. By engaging with individuals who were down on their luck, Robert would have full control of the relationship. It would be easy to engage in sexual relations with these men, as he would give them money or a place to stay. It gave him a false sense of purpose and power. Robert's sexual fantasies took an evil turn when he encountered a movie called The Collector. The premise of the film involved a neurotic man who stalked and abducted a young, attractive woman. He held the woman in his basement for his own selfish entertainment. Eventually, the woman falls ill, and he believes he can nurse her back to health, and the pair could begin a life together. However, the abducted woman would be overcome by her illness and pass away in his basement. He believes the woman got what she deserved and vowed to pick a woman who would be better suited at fulfilling his fantasies. This idea of a chase, seize, and capture made Robert's mind run wild. He found the objective enticing and thus began his pursuit of erratic sexual fulfillment. Robert found his first victim at the Westport flea market where he became a merchant selling art, jewelry, and antiques. Robert's overtly gay persona led 19-year-old Jerry Howell, son of another merchant at the market, to confide in Robert about his own homosexual adventures as a prostitute, not knowing the sick fantasies that were brewing inside of Robert. This disclosure was the start of a vicious killing spree. On July 5, 1984, Jerry asked Robert to take and accompany him to a dancing contest in the city of Merriam, Kansas. However, Robert had other plans. He gave Jerry a diazepam ace-promazine cocktail in his car and continued to do so in his home until he finally lost consciousness. He then proceeded to inject the 19-year-old with tranquilizers as he bound him to his bed. For 28 hours, a sadistic Robert repeatedly taunted, tortured, raped, and sodomized him with foreign objects. While Jerry came in and out of consciousness, he begged to be let go and asked why, over and over again. Robert explains in later testimony that Jerry possibly asphyxiated on his own vomit, or the gag and medicines made it too difficult for him to breathe properly. Once Robert realized Jerry's body went limp, he attempted CPR to no avail. He then dragged Jimmy's body to his basement and began making incisions in his arms and jugular vein to drain the blood from his body, so he could cut up his body without blood splattering about. Once his body was completely drained of his blood, he used a chainsaw to dissect the body and wrap the pieces in newspaper and trash bags. He put the dismembered youth on his curbside on trash day, and the pieces were unknowingly whisked away to the landfill. Less than a year later, on April 10, 1985, a 20-year-old man named Robert Sheldon asked Robert for a place to crash for a few days. Though he wasn't attracted to Sheldon, he agreed to let him stay. However, just 2 days later, on April 12th, Robert eerily measured young Sheldon, as someone he could express some of the anger and frustration that I had toward other people on. He drugged Sheldon in a similar manner to that of Jerry, and held him captive in a spare bedroom for 3 days. This time, he added to his torturing tactics by pouring drain cleaner in his eyes, inserting needles underneath his fingertips, binding and cutting his wrists with piano wires, and filling his ears with caulk. It wasn't until April 15th, when a maintenance man arrived at the home, that Robert felt he had no choice but to suffocate Sheldon. He did so with a sack over his head, so he would not be heard. As with his previous victim, he drained his blood and dissected him, this time in the bathroom. Just 2 months later, in June, Robert was now on a roll and found another opportunity to live out his perverse fantasy yet again. Mark Wallace, a 20-year-old who assisted with Robert's yard work, got caught in a severe thunderstorm while on the property and sought asylum in the tool shed. Robert went to his aid and told him he could stay in the house until the storm passed. Little did Mark know, he'd be safer with the storm than he would be with Robert. Once in the home, he voluntarily took chlorpromazine to help calm his nerves, giving Robert the opportunity to begin his torture sequence. Mark was taken to the bathroom where he was held captive and was tortured with alligator clips on his nipples, so Robert could administer electric shocks to his body. Robert also experimented with hypodermic needles, piercing him with various drugs along the muscles in his back. Robert decided to record the reason and time of death that would be revealed in later interviews. The drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen killed him. His time of death is 7 p.m. on June 23rd. Now on a roll, Robert decided he would up the ante with his next victim, who he found on September 26, 1985. In later testimony, Robert would indicate his first 3 victims were just practice and didn't count as real victims. The one he called his first real victim was 25-year-old James Ferris, with whom he took his sexual torture to new heights. He met with James at a bar and brought him home, where he started his routine with drugs and tranquilizers, this time hid inconspicuously in a meal. He tied James to his bed, where he connected the alligator clips to his shoulders and testicles and sent 7,700-volt electrical shocks into his body. He also used the hypodermic needles again in an acupuncture-like manner, this time on his neck and genitals. Robert noted in his records that after 27 hours, James was no longer able to sit up, experienced very delayed breathing, and promptly died. After a 9-month break, Robert runs into Todd Stoops, a 23-year-old drug addict and prostitute at Kansas City's Liberty Memorial Park. He lured Todd to his home with the promise of drugs on June 17, 1986. He found Todd tremendously attractive, and though he was excited to torture him, he wanted to keep him around longer than his previous victims. Robert would later tell investigators that he did not do this for his enjoyment, but for his mental and physical satisfaction. He tried to torture Todd in a way that would guarantee he wouldn't die. He used his handy alligator clips on his eyes in an attempt to blind him, and poured drain cleaner down his throat to suppress his screams. On June 27th, Robert became irate when Todd asked him for something to eat and drink. He responded to the request by rupturing his anal wall with his fist, causing severe bleeding and dispelling of fluids. It wasn't until July 1st that Todd would finally pass due to his ruptured anal wall, which had caused septic shock. His next known victim came in the spring of 1987. Robert claimed he didn't plan on 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson being one of his torture targets at first. However, on June 23rd, after Larry joked about robbing local gay men, he immediately decided otherwise. Larry was kept in his basement, where he suffered electrical shocks and broken bones from beatings with an iron rod. He was moved from the dank basement to one of the bedrooms, where he continued to be cooperative with his physical and sexual abuse. Robert advised him he would not instill as much pain as long as he kept being compliant. 6 weeks into captivity, tired of living this way, Larry decided a risky move, and during one of their sexual encounters, he intensely bit into Robert's penis.
When I went to the hospital in August of '87 with a human bite to my penis, I tried to turn in a complaint to the police department for the specific reason of developing an alibi.
Before going to the hospital for his well-deserved injury, Robert bludgeoned Larry with a tree limb and suffocated him with a bag and some rope. Upon his return to the home, he returned his body to the basement where he was cut into pieces. His head was kept in a plastic bag in Robert's freezer until he later decided to foolishly bury it in his own backyard. 8 months later, Robert would become acquainted with his final victim, 22-year-old prostitute Christopher Bryson. He picked up Christopher at 1 a.m. on March 29, 1988, and brought him to his home for a cash and sex exchange. He took the same iron bar he used to break the previous victim's bones and rendered Christopher unconscious before binding him to his bed. He instilled his regular torture antics, but this time, he used ammonia instead of drain cleaner. He liked Christopher and told him he would be willing to negotiate the physical torture, but the sexual abuse was not up for debate. Unfortunately, for Robert, his fondness of Christopher would lead to his downfall and capture. Somehow, Christopher convinced Robert to tie his hands in front of him, as opposed to above his head and attached to the bedpost. He also managed to get a television put in the room to entertain him while Robert was off at work. On the 4th day of his capture, Robert unintentionally left a pack of matches on the nightstand within Christopher's reach. He used the matches to burn through his restraints and escape from the home by jumping out of the window, breaking his foot upon landing. Completely nude, minus a dog collar, and now with the pain of a broken foot, he began running toward the street and found a meter maid, who called the police. When questioned by police officers, Christopher did not want to incriminate himself as a male prostitute. He instead reported that he was hitchhiking when Robert picked him up, held him captive, sodomized, drugged, beat, and forced him to ingest ammonia. Due to his red, swollen eyes, deep scars, and welts across his body, he was transported to Menorah Medical Center to receive treatment. A few police officers stayed to survey the home, while another went to the Kansas City Police Department to request a search warrant for Robert's home. On April 2, 1988, the same day Christopher escaped, Robert Berdella was arrested on charges of sexual assault. Investigators entered the home at 4315 Charlotte Street and found the bed Christopher had been abused on, as well as other incriminating evidence, including syringes, prescription drugs, eyedroppers, various ropes, leather belts, an iron pipe, a human skull in the closet, Larry's decomposed head in the yard, the chainsaw with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs on it, a miter saw, plastic blood-stained barrels, hacksawed human vertebrae, sexual devices, pornographic literature, a book on narcotics, newspaper clippings about Jerry's disappearance, James's wallet and driver's license, and an envelope full of human teeth. Further investigations and searches led officials to find 368 photos of at least 20 different men, both dead and alive in copious, disturbing positions. They also discovered the log Robert was keeping, detailing the torture and deaths of each victim, including sufferers of sodomy who he chose not to keep and torment to death. They reached out to the men on the log to decipher who may be dead and who was able to walk away from his house of horrors alive. Robert was well known within the male prostitution community as someone who typically drugged the men before having sex with them, whether they consented or not. Some of the prostitutes also refused to go along with Robert, not just because of his drugging reputation, but because they noticed that some men went missing after being picked up by him. After the discoveries in the home and confirmation from Christopher and Freddie, Robert's 1 count of sexual assault was accompanied by 1 count of felonious restraint, 7 counts of forcible sodomy, and 1 charge of murder by dismemberment. He was held in protective custody in the Jackson County Jail with a bond of $500,000, which would be the equivalent of roughly $1,325,200 in 2024. In August 1988, Robert pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and was transferred to Missouri State Penitentiary. On August 24th, as part of a plea bargain, 6 counts of sodomy and the 1 charge of sexual assault were dropped, and he was sentenced to an additional 7 years for the 1 count of forcible sodomy and 1 count of felonious restraint against Christopher Bryson. On September 13, 1988, he made a plea for the additional 5 murders, stating if he willingly confessed and gave all the graphic details, prosecution would have to promise not to seek the death penalty. During his testimony, he said, "These were not people that I thought of, once I had them bound and was using them. They became something other than people to me. I never thought it out to the level of, what if one of these bodies ever gets loose?" Robert had his formal hearing on December 19, 1988, where he gave a harrowing testimony and was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder for Robert Sheldon and second-degree murder for the other 4 victims, adding 5 concurrent life sentences to his punishment. Unfortunately, the sexual sadist did not get to live out his days in prison, as he began suffering heart problems just 3 years into his life sentence. On October 8, 1992, he started experiencing severe chest pains and was taken via ambulance to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where the 43-year-old was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. It is calamitous that Robert Berdella didn't get to live out his days in prison. He definitely got off easy, unlike his poor victims. Could a movie really entice someone this much to perform such heinous and nightmarish actions? Or was it something that had always been festering inside his black soul that led him to do such revolting things to these men? It is also speculated that there were more victims, but due to their profession of choice, most missing cases went uncared for, and therefore unsolved. Robert died too soon, and took the truth right along with him. Christmas week, 1987. While loving parents planned surprises and wrapped gifts, one father was methodically preparing a haunting execution that would wipe out his entire family. Ronald Gene Simmons was a retired Air Force sergeant, born on July 15, 1940, to parents Loretta and William Simmons in Chicago, Illinois. His father, William, passed away on January 31, 1943, after suffering a stroke. Less than a year later, Mother Loretta married U.S. Army Corps civil engineer William D. Griffin. The family found themselves being relocated to Arkansas in 1946 for Griffin's work. On September 15, 1957, Simmons followed similar steps of his stepfather by joining the U.S. Navy and was stationed in Bremerton Naval Base in Washington. It was there he met Bersabe Rebecca, Becky Ulibarri, and the two married in New Mexico on July 9, 1960. In 1963, Simmons decided to change careers and joined the Air Force, where he would be awarded a Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for his remarkable marksmanship. He held the rank of Master Sergeant when he finally retired on November 30th, 1979. Ronald and Becky had 7 children total, 3 sons and 4 daughters, whom they raised in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. On April 13, 1981, an investigation by the local Department of Human Services was opened due to an inappropriate relationship he was having with his youngest daughter, then 17-year-old Sheila. Simmons did little to hide the fact that Sheila was his favorite out of the 7 children. She always got the best gifts on her birthday and holidays. He also made sure she was the main focus when he would take pictures of the children together. He even took Sheila on car trips, where it is believed he began molesting and raping her. He was regularly seen giving Sheila, or Ladybug as he called her, passionate and lewd kisses in the mornings as she left for school. It wasn't until Sheila admitted to older brothers Ronald Jr. and William that she was pregnant with their father's baby that something was done. The boys went against Simmons's order to keep this a family secret and told school officials what was going on. Despite the disgust felt by the Simmons's children and wife Becky, Ronald was excited about the news of a baby from his Ladybug, but he feared the consequences. The school social worker filed a request to have all of his daughters removed from the home, but by the time the warrant was issued and ready to be served, they discovered the family was gone. Ronald packed the family and fled to Arkansas. Due to their disappearance from New Mexico, incest charges were dropped and he avoided punishment. A love-hate letter addressed to Sheila was later discovered where he stated, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," referring to her betrayal for telling others about their relationship and incest child. By 1963, the Simmons's family were fully settled in Dover, Arkansas, a tiny town of about 1,300 people. The Pope County home was on an isolated wooded 13 acres of land, known as Mockingbird Hill. The residence consisted of 2 old mobile homes that had been arbitrarily joined together, and was completely surrounded by cinder block, barbed wire, and a handmade fence to keep people out. The long, deteriorating red clay driveway had several no trespassing signs that led to their overcrowded yard where piles of building materials, junk cars and trucks and trash was scattered around. The Simmons's home did not have a telephone nor indoor plumbing. Simmons took on work at Woodbine Motor Freight Company as an accounts receivable clerk in the nearby town of Russellville, though he quit after multiple sexual harassment claims were filed against him. He then took on employment at Sinclair Mini Mart, where he stayed until the family's Christmas massacre. The children were put into the local public school, but were never allowed to attend any school events. Though friends did visit sporadically, no one was allowed to spend the night, nor were the Simmons children allowed to spend the night at friends' homes. Ronald never interacted with the visiting children and would just lie on the couch drinking his beer. Liesl Smith, a friend and classmate of Loretta Simmons, stated, "They just tiptoed around him. Whenever he wasn't around, they would act like normal people. When he was around, her mom's main concern was keeping the kids quiet. The look he gave you in his house was, 'When are you leaving?' It was creepy." While the reclusive lifestyle the family lived would normally raise concerns, no one had any real reason to believe there were any issues. The kids were always clean, on time for the bus each day, had a near-perfect attendance at school, no disciplinary record, and while none of the children were straight-A students, none of them were failing either. They all steadily flew below anyone's radar. Although the children were forbidden from attending church, Mother Becky would attend services. Otherwise, she was not allowed to leave the home without Ronald, unless she was doing the family's laundry in town. She was also not allowed to drive, even though she was capable of doing so. Witnesses in later testimonies mentioned regularly seeing Becky with bruises on her face and arms, though no one ever got involved or reported it. Becky was the only member of the family to receive physical discipline from Ronald, though they would sometimes be struck when trying to pull their demented father off of their mother during attacks. Becky Simmons confided in close relatives that she would save enough money to finally divorce Simmons and leave. However, she never got the chance. By the time summer of 1987 rolled around, Simmons's already gloom-ridden mood and behavior had plummeted ever more. His 3 oldest children, Ronald Jr., Sheila, and William, had all married and moved out of the home into other cities. Of course, losing his beloved Sheila is what truly started to push him over the edge. Sheila had confided in her husband, Dennis McNulty, about the events she endured under her father's hand. Dennis, being understandably protective of his new wife and stepchild Sylvia, warned Ronald if he ever touched his wife again, there would be consequences to face. A furious Ronald had no choice but to watch the one woman he truly loved walk out of his life into the arms of another man, with the child they made together. On December 22, 1987, with vengeance in his heart, Simmons drove to his local Walmart and purchased a .22 caliber handgun. He then returned home with nothing but murder on his mind. While still sleeping in bed, his oldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jean Jr., who was visiting for the holiday, was the first to feel the wrath of his father. He was bludgeoned and shot to death in only his underwear and socks. A raging Simmons then went to his bedroom, where 46-year-old wife Becky was also sleeping, and shot her dead as well. He later explained in trials that he left the bodies where they lay for quite some time. All the while, his oblivious 3-year-old daughter Barbara was in the home. Perhaps he thought a shot through her tiny body was unnecessary, and decided instead to strangle the toddler, before wrapping her body in a black trash bag. After having a beer, he decided to start moving the bodies out of the home. A few days prior, he had the Simmons' children dig a cesspit in the backyard for a supposed outhouse he planned on building. Since the home had no plumbing, who knew a few days later, it would be their grave. The other Simmons children were still in school, enjoying their last day before Christmas break. He sat back, drank some more beers, and patiently awaited their arrival. When the bus finally arrived, he strangely greeted the children, telling them he had a special Christmas surprise for each of them. However, they needed to be gifted separately. He instructed the children to wait in their rooms until he was ready for them. The first to receive their special gift was his 17-year-old daughter Loretta. Using the .22 caliber handgun he purchased earlier that morning would have alerted the other children of the present they too would be receiving. Instead, he called her outside, where he strangled her and held her head in a rain barrel until she drowned. One by one, he called the children down, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Rebecca, to experience the same callous fate their older sister just had. They too were thrown in the cesspit. They all had a hand in digging just days earlier. It is unclear what Ronald Simmons did in the days leading up to his other children's expected arrivals to the home. They were all previously invited by their mother, Becky, for an after-Christmas dinner on Saturday, December 26, 1987. Around midday, 22-year-old son William, his wife, 21-year-old Renata, and 1-year-old son William Trey Jr. were the first to arrive. Immediately upon their entrance into the home, right in front of baby Trey, both William and Renata were shot dead. Their bodies were erroneously placed on the dining room table, where they should have been having their family holiday dinner. He then covered their bodies with their own coats and some bedding, before turning his attention to likely screaming baby Trey. In similar fashion to his younger children's exit from the world, Trey was strangled and drowned. However, instead of being placed on the table with his parents, or in the cesspit with his deceased aunts and uncle, Simmons placed his body in plastic wrapping and threw him in the trunk of one of the many abandoned cars in his yard. About an hour later, the last of the Simmons' clan arrived, his now 24-year-old daughter Sheila, 33-year-old son-in-law Dennis, his incestuous daughter/granddaughter 7-year-old Sylvia, and 21-month-old grandson Michael. After some insincere greetings, Sheila and husband Dennis were abruptly shot dead, with both children watching. The next in his line of execution was Sylvia, and then finally baby Michael. Both were strangled to death. Baby Michael's body, just like baby Trey's, was wrapped in plastic and thrown in a separate abandoned car's trunk in the yard. He then made his way back inside the home, lined up the bodies neatly in a row in his living room, and covered the corpses with their coats. Sheila, his ladybug, however, was covered with Becky Simmons' finest tablecloth and displayed in a funeral viewing-like manner. Before going out for a night on the town, Simmons made sure to visit the outside grave and poured kerosene over the bodies in hopes of preventing animals and passers-by from smelling the now rotting flesh. He then drove to Russellville and picked up some Christmas presents he ordered before the holiday, as he was too busy exterminating his family to pick them up on time. He then stayed in town and went to a private club and bar for some drinks. He then returned home, drank more beers, and watched television, ignoring the decaying bodies in his living room. He spent the next 2 nights lounging next to his disintegrating family members, waiting for Monday to arrive so he could complete his apparent kill list. On the morning of Monday, December 28, 1987, Ronald Simmons got into his son Ronald Jr.'s car and drove back to Russellville, where he purchased a second gun from Walmart. He then made his way to his first stop, Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons law firm. The secretary for the firm, 24-year-old Kathleen "Kathy" Kendrick, was a woman he had become infatuated with. Despite his desperate advances with constant candies and flowers, Kathy was not interested. She repeatedly rejected Simmons, as it was inappropriate work behavior, and she was happily married with an almost 3-year-old son. In an effort to seek retribution for this humiliation, he swiftly walked inside the firm, shot her multiple times in the head where she sat at the front desk, and just as swiftly walked out. At about 10:15 a.m., police dispatchers received their first call. Russellville Chief of Police Herb Johnston and Officer Lloyd Hartzell responded to the gruesome scene. Simmons then drove down the street to Taylor Oil Company, looking for previous employer, Russell "Rusty" Taylor, the owner of Sinclair Mini Mart, where he quit just a few days prior. Upon arriving, he found Rusty on the loading dock with truck driver and stranger James "Jim" David Chaffin. He shot at both men, striking Rusty in the chest, while Jim received multiple shots to the head. As Simmons made his way out of the building, another employee came out to investigate what was happening and was also shot at, but he thankfully missed the bystander. Chief of Police Johnston received another call at 10:26 a.m. about this second shooting. He quickly left the law firm to investigate. Rusty survived the attempted assassination, while 33-year-old Chaffin died on the scene. Next stop was the Sinclair Mini Mart, where he shot ex-co-workers Roberta Woolery and David Salyer. Just 13 minutes after the last call, Johnston yet again rushed to the new crime scene alongside another officer, where they found Roberta shot in the jaw and David with a bullet in his head. Both fortunately survived. Simmons's next and last stop in his killing spree was Woodbine Motor Freight Company, where he first met previously slain Kathy Kendrick. The target at this location was one of his former supervisors, Joyce Butts, who interfered with his attempts to sweep Kathy off her feet. He believed she was the reason he was not successful in his inappropriate propositions, and why he needed to quit the job. He shot Joyce in the head and chest at close range. Though she miraculously did not succumb to her injuries, she never fully recovered from the brain injury she sustained as a result of the shooting. It was then Johnston received his fourth and final call, about 10 minutes later at approximately 10:49 a.m. This time, however, Simmons did not leave the scene. Instead, he found one of the secretaries, Vicki Jackson, hiding in the back of the office and ordered her at gunpoint to call the police. Jackson reported that Simmons told her, "I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." He then tried to give her one of his guns and asked if she was nervous and offered her a cigarette, both of which she refused to take. Just outside was Johnston and about 20 other officers, waiting to take down Simmons. While rifles and shotguns were drawn and pointed toward the entrance of Woodbine Motor Freight Company, Johnston received word that Simmons was done with his Monday massacre and wanted to surrender. Johnston was quoted in later reports, "I called him out and he came out. He had a .22 caliber pistol in his hand, but he wasn't pointing it anywhere. And he asks me, 'What do you want?' I said, 'I want your damn gun.' And he gave it to me." Johnston went on to describe that Simmons was quiet and willingly complied with all of their requests. Russellville police were elated about capturing Simmons and ending the grievous rampage motivated by former co-workers and employers. But they still had no idea about the shocking, gut-churning scene that was waiting for them back at the Simmons home. It was Simmons's reluctance to answer any questions about his family that led police to perform a wellness check at the Mockingbird Hill home. Police broke into the home and were instantly met with the bodies he left laid out in his living room. Though it wasn't until the next day they discovered the bodies in the pit outside and the 2 toddlers in the car trunks. When Simmons was presented with what they found, he refused to give any comment or explanation. Simmons was then sent to the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock, where he was evaluated by psychiatrist Dr. Irving Kuo. Dr. Kuo reported him as sane and capable of standing trial. Speculation as to why Simmons would go on to annihilate every member of his immediate family would run rampant. It was believed that he found his wife Becky's letters about wanting to divorce and leave him. However, prosecuting attorney John Bynum believed he found evidence of the true motive. A safety deposit box owned by Simmons held an undated love-hate note to his daughter Sheila, explaining his disdain for her leaving him. He was truly at a loss as to why she moved away, married Dennis, and had a child with him. The judge ruled the letter as admissible, sending Simmons into a frenzy. He punched prosecutor Bynum in the face and attempted to grab a deputy's handgun from his waist before being dragged out of the courtroom in chains. He was charged and convicted of 16 counts of capital murder, and on March 16, 1989 was sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years for his mass murder. He waived his right to appeal his death sentence, stating, "I, Ronald Gene Simmons Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal. It is further respectfully requested that this sentence be carried out expeditiously. To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Once again, he was evaluated to make sure his refusal of a death penalty appeal was of sound mind. For a second time, it was reported he was completely coherent and competent. After back-and-forth legal proceedings about whether or not the death penalty should be executed, Arkansas Governor and later U.S. President Bill Clinton signed the execution warrant on May 31, 1990. During this time, Simmons refused all visitors, including legal counsel and clergymen. His final meal consisted of filet mignon, 2 raw onions, tomato slices, a banana, 6 rolls, and a 7-Up. Ronald Gene Simmons was put to death by lethal injection on June 25, 1990. This psychotic rampage is now known for being the worst crime involving one family in the history of the United States. So how does a decorated and respected veteran turn into an absolute bloodthirsty tyrant? Did he really not see the issue with being in love with his own daughter? What was it about Sheila that drove him to commit the worst mass murder in Arkansas history? There's still so many unanswered questions. They said he was intelligent and competent, but his thoughts and actions towards his own daughter and family truly say otherwise. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share your thoughts. On the cold night of May 11, 2012, a family in Darby is preparing for bed. But as the children are about to slumber, Michael and Mered Philpott are carrying out an egregious plot that will rock the entire nation of England to its core. Michael Philpott was born December 1956 in Derby, a benevolent city in the heart of England. Derby is known for being the birthplace of Britain's Industrial Revolution, its vibrant cultural historical scene, and widely diverse restaurants. The East Midlands city hosts a population of about 250,000 people and typically has short, comfortable summers and long, cold winters. Michael, who is more commonly known as Mick, does not share the same historical data as his birth city. There is no information readily available about the domestic tyrant's early life, giving us no insight into how he became one of Britain's most hated fathers. His story begins at the age of 19, when he was training to be in the army. It was then he met his first victim, 15-year-old Kim Hill, who was born in June 1961. Her father was an Army officer, and her mother Shirley worked at Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes, a shop catered to those in the service. Mick gave the impression of someone who was charming and charismatic when he asked a young, naive Kim for her phone number. Kim recalls in later interviews, "You know when you get your sort of first boyfriend, and you get them butterflies in your stomach? It was, like that. Unfortunately for Kim, this love high did not last long. Mick went from charming to repugnant in the blink of an eye, subjecting Kim to a series of physical beatings, both in private and in public. She would be slapped, punched, or kicked if she didn't arrive home by the curfew he forcibly imposed on her. On another occasion, she was wearing a skirt that was too short for Mick's liking, and he responded by shooting her in the groin with a crossbow. He also made it very clear he would not tolerate her giving attention to anyone else, including a baby she was babysitting. During one of her babysitting sessions, Mick appeared with a sledgehammer and cracked her in the kneecap for giving the baby more attention than him. She was not allowed to refuse any of Mick's requests, as he found it disrespectful and rewarding of instant punishment. One evening, she refused to play pool with him while they were in a local bar. His reaction, despite the crowd, was quite ghastly. He got the thick end of the pool cue and whacked it straight across my mouth in front of a pub load of blokes. And not one of them did anything. My mouth just burst open bleeding. He made me sit and not one bloke said a word to him. "You never say no to Mick Philpott. You never ever say no," recounted Kim. She further explained he would start crying, saying he was sorry, begging her not to tell her father about how she was receiving these physical ailments, and told her she couldn't leave him as he would never hurt her again. Kim believed she was catching a break whenever Mick had to spend time away at his army posts. However, any time he returned, he would violently assault her while accusing her of engaging in affairs in his absence. He would randomly go AWOL while he should have been on post, so he can sneak in on her and perhaps catch her doing something wrong. His bite marks, her broken cheekbones, and bruised fingers were becoming harder to conceal. She had to begin telling school officials she was getting into frequent fights with others at the school so they could explain away the bruises to her family. During the summer of 1978, after 2 years of enduring constant manhandling, Kim decided to finally take a stand and wrote him a letter, breaking up with him. It was something Mick Philpott would not take lightly. On the evening of July 4th, he followed Kim to her home and patiently waited for her father to leave for his routine night shift. At around 2 a.m., he broke into the Hill home and went straight to Kim's room, where she lay asleep. He proceeded to gruesomely stab Kim 27 times before her mother Shirley entered the room, attempting to remove a seething Mick off of her daughter. He then turns to Shirley and stabs her 11 times, mainly in the back, as she tries to escape out of the room and down the stairs to call for help, not knowing Mick already slit the phone wires. With Shirley out of his hair, he turns back to Kim. "I thought he was punching me. He went off and I got myself out of bed, but I just fell on the floor. The next thing I knew, he was attacking me again. He slit my stomach open, all down my back, the tops of my legs and my arms. He punctured both lungs and went through my liver and my kidney. He left me for dead," remembers Kim. It was younger sister, 15-year-old Crystal, who would finally call for help on another house phone after she heard the screams of her sister and mother. When paramedics arrived at the home, they found a disdainful Mick on the stairs, still holding the bloodied knife. He was actually laughing and said to the paramedics, "I wouldn't bother. She's a goner. I've done a good job on her." One would imagine after being gutted open like a fish, survival was highly improbable. Kim would die twice, once on the way to the hospital and again on the operating table, but doctors were able to revive her. She suffered substantial injuries to her lungs, liver, kidneys, bladder, and bowel. However, after an exhaustive thorough surgery and 8 weeks in intensive care, Kim Hill made a remarkable recovery. In December 1978, Mick Philpott would go on to be found guilty of attempted murder and wounding with intent in a jury trial. He was sentenced to 7.5 years for the attempted murder on Kim, and a concurrent 5 years for the grievous bodily harm to her mother Shirley. Kim once again believed she had rid herself of the monster within Mick, but he continued to unapologetically reach out to her, claiming his love for her and even asking her to marry him in a letter written from prison. He was completely unremorseful and incapable of comprehending the severity of his actions. He wrote to me on the basis of, "I know that you'll forgive me and I didn't mean to do any harm. Come and see me soon, and when I get out, we'll start again and get married." I was gobsmacked, literally gobsmacked. He was patting on like he was on holiday. "I've led a completely quiet life for the last 32 years because of that bastard. I won't even go into town and I'm still having treatment. My life has been ruined. a still-affected Kim stated in an interview. To make matters worse, after only serving 3 years and 2 months, Mick was released in 1982 for good behavior. Though it seems his good behavior was not something he'd continue to carry on. Despite practically disemboweling someone just a few years earlier, he found love again with a woman named Pamela Lomax. In 1986, though Mick was still exhibiting his innate signs of control, manipulation, and violence, the couple married. They had 3 children together, David, Richard, and Michaela, before he left her 10 years later for a 14-year-old girl named Heather Kehoe. Heather met Mick in Rainworth, Nottinghamshire, at just 13 years old when he began grooming her with beer, cigarettes, and the promise of love. When Heather turned 16, against her parents' wishes, she ran away to live with Mick, who was about 39 years old at the time. She quickly gave birth to 2 sons back-to-back, Mickey and Aiden. Mick was agitated that Heather failed to birth him a daughter and beat her uncontrollably, possibly the cause for her not being able to conceive again. He continued to physically and sexually assault her until she gathered the courage to leave him in early 2000. In the same year, Mick met Mered Duffy, a 19-year-old single mother of 1 son, Duane. Mered proved to be an easy target for Mick, as she just got out of an abusive relationship and was still vulnerable. Within days of meeting, she moved in with Mick at his 3-bedroom home on Victory Road in Derby. In 2001, he met 16-year-old Lisa Willis, an orphan and single mother to 1 son. She moved in with Mick and Mered as his mistress, resulting in an uncustomary and contentious household. In May 2003, Mick and Mered tied the knot, with a pregnant Lisa as their bridesmaid. Mick began receiving public criticism in 2006 for his refusal to get a job and choice to live solely off of welfare. By this time, Mick had 4 children with Mered and fathered 3 more with Lisa, who was now pregnant with their 4th child. He complained to his local council about the house they shared being too crammed since there were 3 adults, 8 children, and another on the way. The city council advised him he lived in one of the biggest homes available in the city and was already receiving in excess of £60,000 per year in benefits. He became frustrated that the city council failed to rehouse them into a more accommodating home. They always come up with the same excuses. They're just not good enough. I love my country, but at the moment I feel ashamed of it. I think the country is going down the pan, Mick told the Birmingham Post. He then went on to appear on The Jeremy Kyle Show and on an ITV documentary series called Ann Widdecombe versus the Benefit Culture in 2007, as he seemed to love causing a media frenzy. He defended his odd lifestyle, stating, "Do they know me as a family? Do they know my kids? I don't think so. Anybody who wants to see me, my other partner, and my kids, they can come and stop with me for a week, and I guarantee after a week they'll be amazed, especially at the way my children behave. My children are brought up properly." He claimed he was almost done having children and would soon be having a vasectomy. However, it was during this same spotlight in the media he revealed both Mered and Lisa were each expecting their 5th child with him and were both due in March 2007. It would also be revealed that he cheated on both Mered and Lisa with a friend's girlfriend, who also fell pregnant. He was soon dubbed with the nickname Shameless Mick, though that didn't stop him from continuing to speak his piece to tabloids, insinuating that everyone was just jealous of him because he lived with 2 women, and any man would love to be in his shoes. In an effort to pay back Mick for his time on her documentary series, Ann Widdecombe found him a job, which he failed to show up for. He was offended at the job offer and referred to Widdecombe as an interfering bitch. He didn't feel the need to work as both Mered and Lisa contributed to the household income, and he had his welfare benefits to rely on. "Some people call me a scrounger, but I'm not. I'm just a good father," Mick stated to tabloids. Forensic psychologist Dr. Carrie Nixon gave their opinion on Shameless Mick and the empire he was building. His children became numbers. Numbers equal money. The more children, the more money. The more children, the better opportunity in terms of housing. Children were just another part of Philpott's selfish, egocentric, narcissistic, antisocial personality to get what Philpott wants. By February 2012, Mick had 6 children with Mered and 5 with Lisa. Sick of living in undesirable conditions and being forced to obey Mick's iron fist, Lisa decided to escape from the home with her children on February 11th. She told him that she would be taking the children out for their swimming lessons and never returned. This would not be taken lightly by Mick, who became obsessed with Lisa, urging her to come back home. But it was too late. Lisa had already filed a custody case against Mick, and with his repugnant lifestyle already broadcasted across the nation, she would be sure to win. Lisa's decision to leave is the catalyst that led to the grim and harrowing event that would take place just a few months later. On May 11, 2012, one day before their child custody hearing, Mick put into action the demonic plan he devised with wife Mered and their friend Paul Mosley to teach Lisa a lesson she'd never forget. Friend Paul arrives at the home once Mered and Mick put their 6 children to bed. The three discuss their diabolical plan once more to make sure they all have their stories straight as they drank heavily, smoked marijuana, and partook in a threesome. Around 3 a.m., Mick begins what he believes will be the perfect revenge for Lisa leaving him. He begins by splashing petrol on the floor in the hallways of the home, while Paul works on getting rid of the empty containers to avoid any incriminating evidence. Mick believed he could start a fire, rescue the sleeping children from the flames, become a national hero, rid himself of the shameless Mick persona, and blame Lisa for the entire ordeal. He would then get custody of the children he had with Lisa and continue to collect welfare benefits for them. But his plan swiftly failed. Mick lights a match around 3:30 a.m., and the house quickly goes up in flames, spreading like wildfire and blocking the children's only planned escape route. Mick did not anticipate the fire escalating as quickly as it did, and his plan to play hero and rescue them no longer seemed doable. Feeling they were unable to do anything, all of the adults left the home as the children were heard helplessly screaming and begging for their parents to come help them, as they inhaled the poisonous black fumes that now engulfed the home. They made their way to a neighbor's garden to keep a safe distance from the fire, and Mered phoned emergency services around 3:46 a.m. while she tried her best to sound devastated.
The house is on fire. My kids are in bed.
Yes. What address?
18 Victory Road. Mrs. Philpott.
Mrs. Philpott. How many kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott? Where are they?
I'm 6 of them.
Are there any flames there?
Oh my God, please.
All right, we've got the fire service coming on the way.
I can't get in the bed in the kids' room. There's 6 of them.
Is it a terraced house?
Please.
Yeah, we've got the police on the way. Have you any idea what's caused the fire?
I've never had my kids to work up all day long. There's smoke everywhere.
There's smoke everywhere.
Please, God, my baby's all upstairs. I can't get out.
Okay, what's your name, please?
I can't do it. There's no noise from the children. There's no noise from the children.
Mick immediately starts telling his neighbors, who have now gathered frantically in front of the home, that he believes Lisa is responsible for starting the fire. One neighbor, Jamie Butler, ignores Mick's strange behavior and tries to go into the home in an effort to rescue the children, but the fire was impenetrable. Jamie stated later, "There was no emotion out of none of them. If he would have grabbed hold of me and said, 'Please come on, let's get in there, my kids are in there,' I know that would have been a true man as a father." Another neighbor, Mick Russell, burst into tears during the fire and later recounted, "He was comforting me. I was sitting there crying my head off and he was comforting me. You know, I am supposed to be the one comforting him." Firefighters were finally able to tame the fire, but it was too late. One by one, the small bodies emerged from the home in the arms of the firemen as distraught neighbors watched on. 10-year-old Jade, 9-year-old John, 7-year-old Jack, 6-year-old Jesse, and 5-year-old Jaden. They soon find out that 13-year-old Duane had somehow survived in the flames and was whisked away to Birmingham Children's Hospital in critical condition. Though Duane was fighting for his life, parents Mick and Mered would wander off, frequently leaving him alone. One would think the guilt of what they had just done would make them be more concerned, but the couple showed absolutely no remorse or support for the dying boy. Neighbor Mick Russell went to the hospital to give moral support and check in on the boy, but was further appalled by Mick's bizarre behavior. All of a sudden I heard him shout, "Mick!" And I turned around, I said, "What?" And he's grabbing this girl's arse and saying, "This is what I like." I said, You got a lad in there dying, mate, and 5 of your kids are dead. Is that what you're still thinking about? Unfortunately, 2 days later, Duane ultimately fell victim to the smoke inhalation and passed away on May 13, 2012. Mick continued to place blame on Lisa to anyone who would listen, though Lisa Willis would quickly be ruled out for any foul play, as her alibi was completely solid. On May 14th, possibly due to the allegations by Mick, authorities inspected the home and found the fire was indeed started deliberately. They also found the empty petrol containers in and near the home. On suspicion of Mick and Mered due to their peculiar behavior, police decided to bug the Premier Inn on South Mead Way, where they resided after the fire. They overheard the couple confirming their involvement in the fire along with their friend Paul Mosley. On May 28th, the couple was arrested, and after extensive interviews, they were charged with murder on May 30th. In June 2012, Paul was also arrested for his involvement, but had soon been released on bail. It wasn't until November 5th that Paul was officially charged with murder, which would later be downgraded to manslaughter. Mick and Mered's charges would also be lightened to manslaughter, as they ruled the intention was not to kill the children, but to vengefully frame Lisa. On February 12, 2013, the trial at Nottingham Crown Court commenced, and after a daunting 7 weeks, a verdict was reached. On April 2, 2013, Michael Philpott, Mered Duffy, and Paul Mosley were found guilty of the manslaughter of all 6 children. On April 4th, Mick was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 15 years, while Mered and Mosley were each sentenced to 17 years, with parole possible at the halfway mark. Mered was released in October 2020, while Paul was released in October 2023. Mick Philpott, thankfully, remains in prison. It is apparent that Michael Philpott was a power-hungry, psychopathic womanizer. And yet, no matter his actions, women continued to breed with this fertile monster. Knowing this man almost gutted a woman to death, knowing he refused to work, knowing he spread his seed any and everywhere, they still submitted to him. While Mick was the clear mastermind in the abominable event that took place on May 11, 2012, the people who excused and allowed his appalling behavior throughout the years are just as responsible. And though half of his children are deceased, it is the children still living who must deal with the mental anguish caused by his heinous crimes. It is no surprise shameless Mick will always be considered one of Britain's most evil fathers. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share your
Corporate 911, do you need
Please forgive me, I'm sorry.
Hello?
Friday, June 24, 2016. What should have been the start of a celebratory few days turned into a horrific ending that no one, especially the Sheets family, could have predicted. Christy Bird Sheets, a conservative Baptist from Decatur, Alabama, born May 2, 1974, was a seemingly loving mother to her 2 daughters, Taylor age 22 and Madison age 17. Not very much is known about her parents, but she was said to have a great and loving relationship with her grandparents, especially her grandfather, who she affectionately called Papa. She was described as kind, outgoing, and for the most part, everyone liked her. When Christy was in high school, she met Jason Sheets, who grew up about 15 minutes from her in Trinity, Alabama. Jason was born June 24, 1971, and much like Christy, he was also very well liked by the people around him. He was a standout pitcher for East Lawrence High School. His coaches praised him for how smart he was, as well as one of them stating, "He is the best pitcher I've ever had." Shortly after graduating, Jason and Christy got married and started focusing on building a family. They would move to Huntsville, then to Coleman before eventually settling in Katy, Texas, growing their family with every stop. On April 19, 1994, Taylor Sheets was welcomed into the world. Taylor became the epitome of someone destined for success. By age 22, Taylor belonged to a handful of prestigious scholarly high school organizations, including the National Honor Society. She moved on to graduate with honors from Lone Star College in Cypress, Texas. Besides being a model student, Taylor loved to draw and work with children. She held positions as a nanny and a teacher at Kids Are Kids Daycare Center, near her Katy home. Taylor would go on to enroll at the University of Houston for a degree in medical diagnostic sonography, but due to the gruesome, unforeseen circumstances that took place on the evening of June 24, 2016, she would never make it. Christy and Jason Sheets moved to Coleman a few years after having Taylor, where they welcomed a second daughter, Madison, on October 21, 1998. Madison was just as brilliant as her sister Taylor. By the time she was 17, the high school junior had completely followed in older sister Taylor's academic footsteps, also becoming part of the esteemed National Honor Society, as well as the Spanish Honor Society. She even followed suit in working with children and was known for being a wonderful and caring babysitter in her spare time. It was clear Madison was more than equipped to uphold the high standards Taylor already put in place. After having Madison, Jason Sheets moved the family to Katy, Texas, a small suburb of Houston with a light population of about 17,000 people, for better work opportunities. Katy was a former railroad town along the MKT Railroad. It has hot and humid summers and generally mild winters. It also has plenty of things a family would love, such as water parks, hiking trails, and museums. Jason and Christy felt like this was a perfect place to truly settle down and continue to raise their two daughters. Christy loved to boast via Facebook posts about how much she loved her beautiful and intelligent daughters. Christy even paid homage to them in a post in September 2015 on National Daughters Day, stating, "Happy Daughters Day to my two amazing, sweet, kind, beautiful, intelligent girls. I love and treasure you both more than you could ever possibly know." Less than a year later, these words would no longer carry the same sentiment. Despite how wonderful the family looked to outsiders based on both daughters' achievements and Christy's social media posts, there was turmoil slowly brewing. It was well known Christy and Jason, who were married for close to 20 years, experienced some marital strife causing them to regularly separate and take some much-needed time apart. For majority of their marriage, Christy's poor mental health lay dormant, until it fully reared its ugly head on June 8, 2012, when her beloved grandfather and confidant passed away. This was the downward spiral that ultimately led to the Sheets family's demise. A short 2 months after the heartbreaking death of her grandfather, Christy Sheets experienced yet another death of a close family member, her mother. Christy's mental health soon became the cause of much anguish within her family. Local police reported a whopping 14 calls received from Sheets residents for various reasons since January 2012, including a distress call about Christy's attempted suicide. In the time since her grandfather's passing, Christy Sheets would go on to be committed into 3 mental health care facilities due to concerns about her deteriorating mental state and continued failed attempts to take her life. A crisis intervention which took place in May 2014 led husband Jason to advise authorities that Christy was taking multiple prescriptions for diagnosed depression and anxiety, although specific medications were not disclosed to the public. On Friday, June 24, 2016, notwithstanding Christy's current mental state, the family decided to come together and celebrate the day. Not only was it Jason Sheets' 45th birthday, their eldest daughter Taylor was also set to marry her partner of almost 5 years, Juan Lugo, on Monday, June 27, 2016. At some point, during their now seemingly forced family time together, Christy and Taylor began to argue. Although details of the argument are not clear, it ended with Christy attempting to use her wavering parental authority to ground Taylor and forbid her from seeing her fiancé. Jason did not agree with this unwarranted punishment for their adult daughter, especially being 3 days away from her union in holy matrimony. Jason would go on to let Christy know he was done putting up with her unreasonable and unjustifiable behavior. Jason Sheets told Christy he wanted a divorce, and in a fit of anger blurted, "This would be the last birthday that you are going to ruin." Little did he know what meaning that statement would take on as the evening continued to unfold. It would truly be a birthday to remember. Shortly before 5 p.m., Christy Sheets called a mandatory family meeting in their living room. Jason believed she would be discussing the topic of their divorce with Taylor and Madison. Once the unwitting family members sat down to listen to what their mother had to say, Christy pulled a loaded gun from the couch cushions, which she inconspicuously hid earlier. The family, in a state of shock and dismay, began to plead with their mother, as she pointed the gun at her soon-to-be ex-husband's face. Jason Sheets told Christy to just shoot herself instead, but Christy replied by saying, "This isn't about that. This is about punishing you." Both daughters called 911, where they were heard begging their mother not to shoot them while Jason bargained with her, claiming he will do anything she says. Just a warning before you hear them, because they are fairly disturbing.
Corporate 911, do you need
I promise you, please forgive me. I'm sorry. Please
Hello?
don't shoot. Please. I'm sorry. No.
Hello?
Don't shoot my family. Please, I'm sorry. Get away. I won't do anything. You don't want my car.
Hello?
Please don't point that gun at us. Please. I promise you, whatever you want, I will.
Corporate 911, do you need police, fire, or EMS? Hello? Hello?
In true cold-blooded fashion, Christy turned the loaded weapon to her firstborn Taylor and shot her for the first time. As utter shock rang through the family at what they just witnessed, Christy took another shot, this time at her youngest Madison, piercing her in the neck. Jason quickly did what he could to help his wounded daughters by moving them away from raging Mom Christy and having them hide behind the couch. Once he saw an opportunity to flee, the three victims made their way out the front door and into the street to seek help. Taylor would be struck by yet another bullet on her way outside, although she did not succumb to her injuries just yet. Unfortunately, Madison could not withstand the effects of her injury and swiftly collapsed in the street, where she would soon after be pronounced dead. The commotion alerted neighbors to the grisly scene taking place just feet away. Soon, police received a third phone call from a disturbed and concerned neighbor, who went on to describe the chilling details to 911 dispatchers. Another warning before listening to this 911 call. Much like the last one, it is rather disturbing.
Do you need police, fire, EMS?
Yes, we need an ambulance right away. That two people believe they're shot.
Okay, stay on the line. Okay, you think they got shot, you say?
Yes.
Okay. All right, stay on the line.
And there's a lady with a gun.
There's a lady with a gun? Where?
Yes. It's coming out of the house right now. Two
Okay.
people shot outside.
Okay.
People shot outside.
Okay, where's the lady with the gun?
It's on the street right now.
Is she still shooting?
No, it's not shooting, but it's the gun in her hand. I ran to the back of my house.
Okay, do you know who the lady is?
They're my neighbors.
Okay. And the people that she shot, do you know them?
No,
are
ma'am.
they her? Okay.
Abre la puerta.
Are you with the patients right now?
No, because the lady
Okay.
with the gun
What
came
is she
out. I had to
wearing?
run.
Describe her for me. What is she wearing? Can you
me
describe
see.
her for me? What is she? White, black, Hispanic, or Asian?
She's a Caucasian.
Okay.
Go back there.
Okay. What is she wearing?
She's wearing a dress.
What color dress?
Let me try to picture the window. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Don't put yourself in danger though. But do you remember what color her dress was?
She's wearing a purple dress.
Purple dress.
Yes.
Okay.
She's wearing a purple dress. She's on the.
Is it long, short? What is she?
She.
Where are the patients?
They're in the street. They're in the middle of the street.
Okay.
I was London.
It's two people laying in the street?
Two ladies laying in the street.
Two females? Okay.
Yeah, two females. And there's a guy trying to help them. But the lady is on the top of one of them with the gun on her hand.
Okay, but the suspect is on top of one of the females on the street?
Yeah, she's on the street, just standing up.
She's standing over at one of the patients with the gun?
Yes. And
okay.
It looks like both of them are alive. Both of the shot person, the two ladies, they're both alive, but
okay.
She tried to shot again. She's trying to shoot again on the top of her, but Apparently she doesn't have no more. Apparently she don't have any more bullets.
Okay, yeah, I do too, sir. Just stay on the line. Let me know what you see. But don't.
Okay.
I don't want.
She's going inside. She's going inside the house now. Hopefully, he's not getting any more bullets because she's looks like she's going to look for more bullets.
Okay. All right, stay on the line.
And there's I don't know where the guy went, but apparently he's yelling at her, and they're talking back and forth.
Describe the guy.
The guy is also. They're all Caucasians.
Okay. And is the male
coming out?
also?
She's coming back again. She's coming back again with apparently she has bullets now on her.
Okay. Stay on the line.
Oh, he shot her again.
She shot her again?
Yes. From the back. She was trying to run.
While Taylor lay on the ground in the cul-de-sac, fighting for her life, Christy stood over her, still brandishing her now empty gun. Once it became apparent to Christy that her daughter would not die as easily as her youngest did, she went inside the home to reload her murder weapon. She returned moments later and shot Taylor for the third and last time, ending her life. Jason was able to get away and ran all the way to the end of the cul-de-sac. Just after 5 p.m., police arrived on the spine-chilling scene to witness perturbed and erratic Christy still wielding the gun she just used to commit filicide. She was ordered to drop her weapon and surrender to officials, but she refused to comply. After a short stand down, Christy Sheets was fatally shot once by police. Jason Sheets was then taken to the hospital, where he was treated for emotional distress and gave witness testimony to authorities. Fort Bend County Sheriff Troy E. Niels stated, he felt Christy wanted him to suffer. By killing his children, Mr. Sheets will have to live the rest of his life with this horrible memory. As soon as word of the horrid news spread throughout the community, people began to speculate about who the family was. Chris Mascoro, a good friend of Taylor's since middle school, said, without knowing who it was, I texted Taylor just to make sure she was okay. I didn't get an answer. I was freaking out. It wasn't until later that night that I found out it was them. It just tore me apart. I just don't understand. Once the family in question was identified as the Sheets, friends gathered to give statements and express their disbelief. Catherine Knowles, a friend of the family, stated, she loves her daughters. I have no idea what could possibly make a mother who loves her daughters as much as she did. What could cause a person to snap? While Christy had no history of being violent or harmful to others, she was someone who advocated heavily for the Second Amendment right to bear arms. Although due to her mental health issues, she was unable to legally obtain a license to carry a concealed handgun. This, however, did not stop her from taking to her social media posts to express her stance on guns and gun control. She even went on to bash the Democratic Party, indicating that it would be horribly tragic if my ability to protect myself or my family were to be taken away, but that's exactly what Democrats are determined to do by banning semi-automatic handguns. Ironically, she would be the one who her children needed protection from. So how did a mentally unstable woman, who was denied a license to carry, be able to obtain a gun and execute her family's permanent collapse? It was gifted to her by her grandfather, as part of her inheritance when he passed away in June 2012. It seems now that it was not only Christy Sheets' life that was deemed over the day he died. Her grandfather's death started a series of chaotic events that would eventually lead to the family's deadly downfall. For 4 years, the 5-round .38 caliber revolver sat in the Sheets family home, waiting for that fateful day when Christy Sheets would irrationally punish husband Jason Sheets by taking away what he described as his lights in a dim world. In the aftermath, Jason Sheets struggled as any person would dealing with the loss of his family. Losing a wife and both daughters would rattle anyone. He stayed quiet for a while and continued to push through day by day, turning to his faith for strength. He broke his silence when he posted on his Facebook, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Jason was even featured on Dr. Oz with Taylor's former fiancé Juan Lugo, where he talked about his grieving process, and to be honest, it is truly heartbreaking to hear.
What are you doing now?
Well, my life is rooted more so now than ever in my faith, and so given what is, losing the two people that I love most in my life, They were my best friends. I know what it feels like to hit the lowest point and your weakest, so I have resigned myself to trust in His grace and let Him carry me when I can't carry myself anymore.
Can I ask you about your two best friends?
Yeah.
Two beautiful daughters of yours. What would you like people to know about them? What would they like?
Lights of joy in a world full of darkness. And they loved people from every race, religion, background, color. I mean, it didn't matter. They had such pure love and joy in their hearts, and they were more than special. It's very difficult. The hardest part is not as much staying asleep. It's going to sleep. The other thing is when the person you love kills the people you love more than anything, and then shoots at you 3 times, you start to not trust anybody. I started running about a couple of years ago to lose weight, and I had these made up so that whenever I'm running...
So you got Madison
and Taylor.
Yeah, you got both their names.
And then every time I would come in and brag to them about lowering my time, they would say, it was funny how they said it, because they would say, oh, it was like they felt sorry for me for going through the exercise. But they said, you go, Dad. You go, with a little comma, and Dad. And one of the it happens all the time when I'm running, but I think it applies to life in general now without them. Is I think when I'm running and I can't get another breath, I think of each one of them and how each one of them specifically said that phrase to me. And every time that I think of that, I start running a little bit faster.
Jason eventually went on to remarry to a woman named Monica. Not much else is known, other than they are currently living happily together, and they have been married for about 4 years now. As for Christy Sheets, she committed one of the worst crimes imaginable, murdering her own children. And since she was killed by police on the scene, she was never brought trial, nor did her daughters receive justice. It's a shame she will never truly have to face the consequences of what she has done. Where she was laid to rest is currently unknown. Taylor and Madison Sheets were 2 brilliant girls that had their light snuffed out too soon. The worst part of that being it was their own mother who snuffed that light out. The person that was supposed to care for them the most, unfortunately, was the one who ended their lives. Taylor and Madison were laid to rest on Saturday, July 2, 2016, in their home state of Alabama, at the Limestone Memorial Gardens. May they rest in peace. After going over this case, all of us are unfortunately just left with the same questions. What if Christy had just listened to Jason and used the gun on herself, instead of taking her daughter's lives? What if Taylor and Madison got a chance to grow up? With how brilliant those two were, what great works could they have accomplished? Sadly, we will never get those answers. A woman who is described as controlling, demanding, dominating, and a serious force to be reckoned with is often called a man-eater. However, one Australian woman would take on the term quite literally. Catherine Cathy Mary Knight was born on October 24, 1955 in Tenterfield, a town in New South Wales, Australia, to parents Kenneth Ken Charles Knight and Barbara Rofin. Before meeting and cohabitating with Catherine's father, Barbara had been married to Ken's friend and co-worker John Jack Rofin. The couple had 4 sons, Patrick, Martin, Neville, and Barry, whom they raised in the small town of Aberdeen. Barbara began an affair with Ken, and the couple was immediately ostracized by those in the conservative rural town. The backlash from the scandal made them feel compelled to move away so they could continue their lives together without dirty looks and whispered remarks. Barbara ran away with Ken to the nearby town of Maury. Unfortunately, Barbara chose not to take any of her sons, leaving a heartbroken John to make the despairing decision to separate his boys. His 2 eldest sons remained with him, while the youngest boys were shipped off to Sydney to be raised by their aunt. Barbara and Ken went on to have 4 children of their own: son Charlie, twin daughters Joy and Kathy, and son Shane. In 1959, a few years after their departure, ex-husband Jack passed away, and eldest sons Patrick and Martin were sent to join their mother's new clan. Ken and Barbara ran a debilitated household, having lasting effects on Kathy's psyche. Ken was a haggard drunk who would relentlessly rape Barbara without regard for the children being present. Perhaps due to the deplorable acts the sons regularly witnessed, they followed suit and began sexually assaulting Kathy in her youth until about age 11. Kathy felt she had no one but her twin sister Joy and Uncle Oscar to count on, though a devastating turn of events would lead Uncle Oscar to commit suicide in 1969, at which point the family moved away to Aberdeen. Kathy attended Muswellbrook High School, where she obtained good grades, but was known to be a loner and a bully. Her lack of control at home may have been the reasoning behind her tyrant behavior at school. After a few incidents involving physical assault, Kathy left school at the ripe age of 15 and sought employment at a clothing factory as a cutter. A year later, she began her dream job at the local slaughterhouse. She thrived in her position as a cutter and swiftly moved up to boning, and was rewarded with a personal set of butcher's knives. She held such pride in her new position that she displayed her knives above her bed when not in use. When questioned about the knives in later testimonies, she said she hung them over the bed because they would always be handy if she needed them. It was at the slaughterhouse where she would meet David Stanford Kellett. The two started a relationship soon after meeting in 1973. David shared the same drunkard traits as her father. Perhaps the familiarity outweighed the red flags. The two became a powerhouse couple, happily becoming physical with anyone who upset them. The domineering couple decided to marry just a year later in 1974. They showed up on a motorcycle and were extremely intoxicated. Upon arrival, Barbara pulled David aside, warning him about her daughter and her erratic behavior, stating, "Watch out. You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing, and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her. She'll fucking kill you." And that was her mother talking. She told me she's got something loose. She's got a screw loose somewhere. Later that evening, he got his first taste of Kathy's rage when she attempted to strangle him for consummating the marriage only 3 times. Kathy's violence would continue throughout the marriage. She burned David's belongings and hit him across the head with a frying pan after arriving home late. Her antics led David to flee the scene and seek help from neighbors, where he collapsed and was later treated for a severely fractured skull. Though he initially wanted to press charges, a witty Kathy talked him out of it. Despite the chaos, the couple welcomed their first child, Melissa Ann, in May 1976. Soon after, David left Kathy for another woman and moved away. Kathy continued to behave unhinged and was witnessed violently shaking her newborn daughter's carriage while on a walk in the town. Authorities were informed, and Kathy was admitted to St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, where they diagnosed her with postpartum depression, though she was released after a few weeks. With her mental stability at an all-time low, upon her release, she took a now 2-month-old Melissa to a train station and placed her on the tracks. She left the baby, went into town, stole an axe, and proceeded to terrorize patrons. Thankfully, while Kathy was having her axe-waving rant, a homeless man saw Melissa on the train tracks and rescued her, just minutes before a train passed. Again, authorities were informed and she was returned to St. Elmo's Hospital, this time signing herself out after only 1 day, claiming to have been completely cured. Just a few days later, Kathy slashed 16-year-old Margaret Macbeth's face when she refused to drive her to Queensland, where David had now been residing. The woman was able to escape and call the police. When police arrived, Kathy grabbed a child and held him hostage, threatening him with her knife. Police were able to disarm her, and she was then taken to Morissette Psychiatric Hospital, where she admitted to a harrowing plan. She told them she wanted to kill the mechanic who fixed David's car, as she believed he was the reason for his escape to Queensland. She then wanted to kill David, his mother, and his new girlfriend. Police informed David of her plan. However, instead of continuing to stay away from a deranged Kathy, he decided to help and return to her. Kathy was released from the hospital on August 9, 1976, into David and his mother's care. Almost immediately after her release, she stabbed another individual, this time a police officer. However, charges were not pressed because the police stated people knew that was just how she was. Eventually, they all moved to Ipswich, where Kathy began working at Dinmore Meatworks, continuing her dream of being a butcher. The couple had another daughter together, Natasha Marie, on March 6, 1980. 4 years later, in 1984, Kathy decided to leave David and move to Muswellbrook, where she returned to the slaughterhouse. Her vigorous animal chopping led to a back injury, landing her on permanent disability a year after her return. Without being able to work, and no need to stay in the area, she moved to a government residence in Aberdeen, where she met and had flings with several men. In 1986, she met 38-year-old David Saunders. He moved in with Kathy and her daughters after a few short months. She would go on to display her mental instability by cutting the throat of his 2-month-old puppy and hitting him in the head with a frying pan to show him what would happen if he ever cheated or left her. Against his better judgment, he stayed with Kathy, and in June 1988, they welcomed Kathy's third daughter, Sarah. The couple then purchased a home together that Kathy strangely decorated with animal skins, skulls, horns, antlers, animal traps, old boots, machetes, rakes, saddles, and pitchforks. She also proudly displayed taxidermied peacocks and a baby deer. Any space not filled with these peculiar trinkets had old newspapers, clothes, books, and a video collection with predominantly suggestive subject matter. While the relationship initially seemed normal, it wasn't long before Kathy assaulted David with an iron to the face, stabbed him with a pair of scissors, cut up his clothes, and vandalized his car, forcing him to go into hiding. Her deranged antics landed her back in the mental facility. 2 years later, in 1991, Kathy fell pregnant with her fourth child and first son, Eric, with former co-worker and recovering alcoholic, 43-year-old John Chillingworth. Kathy's violence was, of course, a large part of their relationship. John admitted to hitting Kathy back once when she smacked the glasses off of his face and broke his teeth. 3 years into their relationship, Kathy had started having an affair with another man named John Charles Thomas Price and decided to leave John Chillingworth for him. John Price, a father of 3, was privy to Kathy's violent nature. However, it did not faze him, and he moved her into his home in 1995, where he resided with his 2 oldest children. He was described as friendly, well-liked, and a good provider, as his job in the mines came with a great salary, leaving his family wanting for nothing. Kathy pushed for him to marry her, but he refused, causing her to spiral. She sought revenge by telling his boss he had been stealing from his place of work. Though her allegations were false, this caused John to lose a position he proudly held for almost 20 years. He immediately kicked Kathy out of his house, but he soon let her back in and would once again regret the decision. In February 2000, Kathy stabbed John in the chest, leading him to take out a restraining order against her to protect himself and his children. He told co-workers that if he ever did not show up to work, they should immediately assume Kathy had killed him. They advised John to not return home, but against their wishes, he returned to his home around 11 p.m. after hiding out at his neighbor's home all evening. Kathy showed up while he slept, watched some television, took a shower, woke John, and initiated sexual contact, which he absent-mindedly gave into, and then fell asleep. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, on February 28, 2000, neighbors noticed his car was still in the driveway, which was unusual. When he didn't show up for work, his employer, remembering his warning, sent a worker to make a wellness check on John at his home. Upon his arrival to the home, he found neighbors also lurking about the property, peering and knocking on windows in hopes of catching John. They soon stumbled upon some blood near the front door and quickly called authorities. When police arrived around 8 a.m. to the Andrew Street home, they broke into the back door and were welcomed with a mortifying scene. Kathy was unconscious from an apparent suicide attempt by overdose and was taken to the hospital by ambulance, while the home told them a bloody tale. There were smears of blood everywhere, and a large pool located in the hallway. Evidence showed Kathy stabbed 44-year-old John in his sleep. He then awoke and tried to escape. Blood splatter showed he made his way around the home before managing to make it to the front door before either collapsing or being dragged back into the home where he bled out in the hallway. Detective Musio described what he saw that bloody day. "I remember walking down the hallway, and at about shoulder height there were all these blood splatter marks on the walls. To me, it's indicative of each attack. He's absolutely fighting for his life. The bloke's just had sexual intercourse in the bed, and when he wakes up, then stab, stab, stab. He's getting up. There is arterial spurting on the robe in the bed, and on the doorway there's a bloodied handprint, or swipe on the western side of the door near the dressing table, and blood around the light switch. It looks like he's tried to turn the light switch on, and then all down the hallway there are bloody handprints everywhere. And he's almost made it. He's opened the front door, the screen door is shut. There is blood staining trajectory again, flicking out across the front door. He's almost made it, but he wouldn't have survived. He would have been absolutely horrified, terrified, probably terrified more than horrified, trying to get out and all the time being stabbed. Autopsy would reveal he was stabbed about 40 times, many of which pierced through vital organs including his lungs, liver, kidneys, and aorta. After John was finally dead, Kathy took his bank card, went to a local ATM, and withdrew $1,000. After returning to the home, she skinned John, much like she'd do at the slaughterhouse she previously worked for. However, she made sure to leave a small flap of skin in order to hang the body at the entranceway of the home. She then hung his skin on a meat hook on the living room door. She proceeded to decapitate him and cook various parts of his body. She paired his body parts with baked potatoes, carrots, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and some gravy. She set the table and marked the place settings with the name of his children, so she can serve the revolting human meat of their own father to them. Kathy had apparently also served herself a plate of John's flesh, which she ate alongside the veggies she prepared. Further investigation led police to find John's head in a pot amongst the aforementioned vegetables, in what was described as a sickening stew. His skinless left arm was found posed with an empty soda bottle, and his legs were also posed in a crossed position. They also found a bloodied note Kathy had written, alleging that he raped one of her daughters and was the reason for her psychotic murderous rage, though the claims were clearly without basis. Kathy claimed she had no recollection of the stomach-churning murder, mutilation, and cannibalistic choices. During the trial, Kathy stuck with the notion that she did not remember what happened and offered to plead guilty to manslaughter, most likely in hopes of a lighter sentence. However, her plea was rejected, and on March 2, 2021, she was officially charged with murder, to which she pleaded not guilty. Due to several adjournments based on Kathy's mental state, the trial finally started on October 15, 2021. However, after jury selection, Kathy decided to change her plea from not guilty to guilty. Her counsel sent Kathy for psychiatric evaluations to ensure she was of sound mind in her decision to waive a right to a jury trial and plead guilty, especially after preparing a defense for months, which was inclusive of psychiatric support in her amnesia and dissociation claims. New evaluations did find her to be sane, though they concluded she suffered from borderline personality disorder. Although Kathy changed her plea to guilty, she continued to decline full responsibility for the egregious murder. During a sentencing hearing, when experts were set to take the stand to describe the chilling and disgusting scene, Kathy's counsel feared her reaction and requested that the judge allow her to leave the courtroom. The judge, rightfully so, denied their request. If she was able to act out such a heinous murder, she should be able to hear about it as well. However, just as her counsel thought, Kathy became violently hysterical during their testimony, leading her to be sedated. Kathy would also be forced to sit and listen to testimonies from her daughter, who told the court her mother said, "I told him if he took me back this time, it was to the death, and if I kill John, I'll kill myself after it." On November 8, 2021, Judge O'Keefe explained that due to the drastic nature of the crime and Kathy's lack of accountability and penitence, her sentence would be a harsh, yet well-deserved one. Judge O'Keefe stated the murder was carried out with considerable expertise and an obviously steady hand, so that his skin, including that of the head, face, nose, ears, neck, torso, genital organs, and legs, was removed so as to form one pelt. So expertly was it done that, after the post-mortem examination, the skin was able to be re-sewn onto John's body in a way which indicated a clear and appropriate, albeit grisly, methodology. The last minutes of his life must have been a time of abject terror for him, as they were a time of utter enjoyment for her. She has not expressed any contrition or remorse, and if released, she poses a serious threat to the security of society. Catherine Mary Knight was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, becoming the first woman in Australian history to gain such a punishment. In June 2006, Kathy attempted to make an appeal on her sentence as she felt the punishment did not fit the crime, and she should be eligible for parole. Of course, her appeal was dismissed with Judge McClellan writing in his judgment, "This was an appalling crime, almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society." 68-year-old Kathy is still living out her days at Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, where she has reportedly taken an interest in being a mediator amongst fellow inmates. Despite her vicious actions outside of prison, she has not displayed such acts of wickedness behind bars and is known to be a leader in the facility. Regardless of how well-behaved Catherine Knight seems to be after all these years, the residents of Aberdeen have dubbed and will continue to remember her as Australia's Hannibal Lecter. It is apparent Kathy's mental state had been an issue her entire life, stemming from her less than stellar childhood. Though time and time again, men would allow themselves to be victimized and vilified. What good could come from a relationship between a 15-year-old adolescent girl and a 28-year-old man? Love? Marriage? Children? Perhaps a cold-blooded murder? For one Caroline Crouch, the answer would be all of the above. Caroline Louise Crouch was born in Athens, Greece, on July 12, 2001, to retired UK engineer David Crouch and Filipino mother Susan Della Cuesta. The family moved to the village of Alonissos, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, when Caroline was 8 years old. Alonissos is located on the southernmost part of the island and is locally referred to as Kora, or the Old Village. With hot, dry summers and mild winters, agriculture is widespread, with its main products being almonds, grapes, figs, and olives. It was on this island where Caroline would grow up and meet Charalambos Babis Anagnostopoulos at the ripe age of 15 years old, while he was on vacation at his family's holiday home. Babis visited often, as he previously lived on the island from the ages of 10 to 14, when his mother Georgia worked there as a teacher. Babis was 13 years Caroline's senior, but the age disparity did not stop the helicopter pilot from flying over her school, in an effort to impress her and win her over. Caroline lived on the island permanently and was a student there. I worked as a helicopter pilot with a private company, and would visit the island regularly with my helicopter and any other way to see her, explained Babis. Their sexual relationship began when she was 16 years old and he was 29. In later accounts, he describes their meeting and relationship beginnings. She may have been younger, but she was very mature and she was maturing fast. My life changed in 2017 when I saw Caroline. We met at Easter. It was platonic. I was disappointed when I found out her age. I went back on the island in the summer. She is the rarest person I have ever met in my life. A brilliant woman. At 16, you could speak to her about anything. Her personality was lovely. She filled anyone with love. We spent the whole summer together. After that, it was obvious to both of us that we were in a relationship. During the 4 years we were together, Caroline never called me by my name. She only called me darling or little one. No one can tell me otherwise. It was the rarest and most beautiful thing ever. Though as lovely as his words sound, it did not exactly correspond with the ill-fated doom he would subject her to. In September 2018, the couple officially decided that cohabiting and marriage were the next steps for them. Bobby stated, "My absolute priority in everything was her happiness. We were looking for a beautiful home that framed the dream we were living. Caroline loved this particular house. We did not want to live in the city." They moved in together, just a few months before their union in holy matrimony in Glyka Nera, a suburb of Athens, and where Caroline would drastically take her last breath. The couple exchanged vows on July 15, 2019, just days after her 18th birthday, at a beautiful ceremony in Portugal, though they did not inform her parents or any family members about their wedding plans. In the summer of 2018, we had the crazy idea to get married. She had a dream of getting married on a beach, but in Greece this is not legally possible. You need a church. So, we went to Portugal. We both knew it was early. We were madly in love. She organized everything perfectly, even the flowers, the cars, the hotels, everything. We planned to make the summer trip to Portugal, get married, and announce it when we get back. Their honeymoon phase came to an abrupt end when Caroline announced she was pregnant just weeks after their secret getaway wedding in Portugal. Though it was exciting news for Caroline, Babis expressed more reluctant emotions about the pregnancy. When we found out she was pregnant with her first child, it was a big shock. It was too soon to have a child, not only because of her age, but also because we hadn't had much time living together, and this had a big effect on our relationship. We knew a pregnancy would happen at some point, but this was too soon. We were afraid of how the child would change our plans, our trips, and Caroline's studies. Sadly, 3 months into the pregnancy, Caroline began experiencing some issues that became a cause for concern and warranted a trip to the doctor. We found out that there was a problem with the pregnancy. We went to the gynecologist and found out the baby had no pulse and had died. I was devastated. We were both devastated. We were crying as we were falling asleep and hugging as we shed tears, recalled Babis. Babis claims this was the turning point of their relationship, and Caroline became a different person entirely. Her mental health had deteriorated. She was angry and argumentative all the time. He added, "In some moments, Caroline would burst out. I could tell she wasn't herself when she was attacking me, either verbally or physically. I didn't mind her taking it out on me. I understood her." Babis decided that perhaps therapy was the answer to saving their marriage. However, the majority of the therapy sessions were conducted separately, therefore issues were not truly being resolved. Eleni Milanopoulou, the psychologist providing the services, shared, "The moment Babis would leave the room, Caroline would tell me that she wanted to leave their marital home and start all over again. He didn't give her any freedom, and she had no choice in how she lived her life." On paper, Caroline was in love with the idea of Babis, but hated the person who he really was. Eventually, Caroline felt therapy was a waste of time and would begin to find excuses to not see the psychologist, eventually leading to the sessions stopping altogether. Babis believed this is what led their marriage to further deterioration. Despite Babis' interpretation of the events, a diary belonging to Caroline was collected by police in later trials, where it was evident the loss of her first child is not what set off Caroline's supposed aggressive behavior. She had written that Babis was suffocating her, and she felt trapped by his outrageous and controlling behavior. He also prevented her from pursuing her goals to continue her education and become a pastry chef. She battled with her own thoughts on whether to leave him or not, and how she would go about doing so, as Babis would likely not make the departure an easy one. Her diary, though, did not go into grave details about their fights and arguments. She did admit to hitting Babis in one entry. It read, "I fought with Babi again. This time it was serious. I hit him, I cursed at him, and he broke down the door. All I wanted was for him to ask how I am when I woke up. I woke up so weak and tired." In the midst of the mourning period of their unborn child and continued unhappy union, the couple found they were expecting again in autumn of the same year. This time the pregnancy went well, and they welcomed baby girl Lydia in June 2020. Babis claimed that though they were both absolutely in love with their new blessing, Caroline continued to show aggression towards him. A diary entry in July 2020, when baby Lydia was just 1 month old, Caroline expressed her disdain for Babis and her yearning to leave him. However, she'd repeatedly returned to the notion of not wanting her daughter to grow up without both of her parents. In December 2020, Caroline decided to channel her energy elsewhere and reached out to Marathon Animal Association, where rescue animals were cared for until they are adopted. According to the animal shelter, Caroline reached out to them via Facebook and expressed an interest in adopting a puppy to grow up with her now 6-month-old daughter, Lydia. A few days later, volunteers met with Caroline, Lydia, and Babis at a veterinary clinic in Neamakri, just east of Athens. It was there they met 2-month-old puppy Roxy, who they immediately liked and chose to adopt. Caroline's family was one of those who we volunteers consider role models. We were in no doubt that our little one would now live a life full of love and care, one volunteer expressed. Neighbors told reporters that Caroline wholeheartedly adored the rescue puppy. She would walk and play with Roxy daily while accompanied by baby Lydia, a truly lovely sight to witness. All seemed normal to outsiders for the family of 3+1, until one dreadful early morning on May 11th, 2021. Police officers arrived at the home in Glikanera after a frantic Babis phoned them to report an alleged home invasion. When authorities arrived at the home, they were greeted by a shockingly atrocious display. Poor 7-month-old Roxy's lifeless body was strung up and hung on the home's banister. Not knowing what other horrid scenes were awaiting them, the police continued to move about the home with caution. They then discovered Babis, restrained and gagged on the floor of the couple's bedroom. Caroline was motionless on the bed, also bound. Upon further examination, it appeared she had been tragically strangled to death, right in front of her husband and daughter. 11-month-old Lydia sat next to her 19-year-old mother's corpse, hitting her, in an attempt to get her to wake up, authorities reported. One rarely encounters such barbarity in Greece, in Greek society, even among criminals, stated Minister of Public Order Makalis Chrysokoidis. Babis was questioned about the events that transpired that evening that led to his wife's unfortunate and premature death. He began to explain that around 4:30 a.m., 3 foreign-masked gunmen entered the home through the basement as the family slept. Perhaps to stop a barking Roxy, they smothered the puppy and hung it by its leash on the stair rail. They then made their way upstairs to the couple's bedroom. They woke the couple and began taunting and demanding them to give up the whereabouts of any cash or valuables in the home. "Tell us where the money is or we will kill the baby," Babis broken-heartedly quoted them saying. Babis begged them to stop and just take whatever they wanted and directed them to about $18,000 worth of cash and jewelry. As they pointed the gun towards the baby, Caroline, who knew martial arts, started to attack the burglars. The burglar, who seemed to be the leader of the trio, immobilized Caroline, bound her, and began to suffocate her. Among the chaos and fear of Babis's retaliation, he too was bound and gagged. Amidst the struggle and witnessing his daughter be threatened and his wife attacked, Babis lost consciousness. 2 teams of detectives were set up to handle the investigation. They quickly put sketches together, pulled suspect photos, searched for DNA evidence and any security camera footage in the area that could lead them in the right direction. Although the home had a surveillance camera on the ground floor, police discovered the robbers dismantled it and removed the memory card, leaving no video evidence behind. They were also not able to find any traces of DNA or fingerprints at the window in the basement, where they allegedly entered the residence. Camera footage secured from neighbors, however, did give authorities a glimpse of hope. At 5:07 a.m., around the time perpetrators may have fled the scene, a dark-colored car was captured driving down the road, followed by a motorbike just 4 minutes later. A neighbor commented, "I could hear a motorbike the days before the incident, which was standing for a few seconds at the corner of Parados with Panaguli Street. He would circle around the block, return, and then leave. I did not see anything. I could just hear it, because it was late at night about 2 o'clock. They are monsters. How do they kill a mother like that?" Detectives believe the intruders were privy to the cash the couple had on hand before the invasion, and were casing the home before making their move. They suspected it could have been an Albanian-led gypsy gang that were linked to about a dozen string of robberies in the surrounding areas. Another group suspected were the Georgians, who were known for their organized crime in Greece. In the days following the burglary and murder, a 43-year-old Georgian man with a known criminal record was arrested as he attempted to use a fake passport to cross into Bulgaria, though further investigation showed there was nothing tying him to the case. In hopes of finding the maniacal group that incited young Caroline's murder, the Greek government and Crimes Against Life Department of the Hellenic Police offered a reward of 300,000 euros to anyone who could provide them with information that would lead to an arrest. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs, and Babis, now a grieving widow, was receiving a lot of media attention as the brutality of this crime put fear into the hearts of the Greek nation.
Να μην γίνει σε κανέναν άλλον ποτέ ξανά, τίποτα άλλο. Τα παιδιά ξέρουν τη δουλειά τους, θα τους πιάσουν και αυτό που πέρασα εγώ και η οικογένειά μου και η οικογένεια της γυναίκας μου να μην το περάσει ξανά κανείς ποτέ.
Τους παρακαλέσατε?
Τους παρακαλέσαμε, τους είπαμε ότι έχουμε πού θα βρουν τα χρήματα και...
Και παρόλα αυτά, πόση ώρα μείναν μέσα? Πόση ώρα μείναν μέσα?
Συγγνώμη, πρέπει να φύγω. Να είστε καλά. Έχει όσα περισσότερα μπορούσαμε να μαζέψουμε και κάθε μέρα αυτή τη στιγμή είναι 10, 15, 20 άνθρωποι στο δρόμο και ψάχνουν. Αυτό ξέρω, είναι με συνέχεια σε επικοινωνία μαζί μου, όσο έχω μπορέσει να τους βοηθήσω. Αν υπάρχει κάποιος που μπορεί να τους βρει, θα τους βρουν τα παιδιά αυτά.
Ήταν τόσο σκληροί, δηλαδή δεν καταλάβαιναν από τα παρακάλια σας, από αυτά που τους λέγατε.
Παιδιά, μας έδεσαν και από εκείνο το σημείο και μετά δεν τους είχαμε πει ήδη που είναι τα χρήματα. Δεν ξέρω.
Εσύ κατάφερες και πήρες τηλέφωνο?
Όταν συνειδητοποίησες ότι η γυναίκα σου δεν βρίσκεται στη ζωή?
Όταν με έλυσαν η αστυνομία. Όταν ήρθαν οι αστυνόμοι μέσα και με έλυσαν και έβγαλαν από το κεφάλι μου τα δεσμά.
Και η κορούλα?
Η κορούλα μου ευτυχώς δεν έχει χτυπήσει, πήγε στο νοσοκομείο προληπτικά και ευτυχώς είναι καλά.
At Caroline's funeral service, a teary-eyed Babis expressed during a heartfelt eulogy, "I was very lucky that I knew Caroline and that she loved me. I was very lucky for all the moments we shared. One thing that makes me even more sadder than her death is the fact that our daughter will grow up without remembering her beautiful mother, who was the joy of my life. But through her daughter, Caroline will always be with me and with all of us. You should always look after your loved ones and enjoy your time together." On June 17, 2021, about a month after her death, a memorial service was held for Caroline Louise Crouch in Alonissos. While people near and dear to the late mother of one gathered to remember and mourn her, police arrived via helicopter to inform Babis there had been a break in the case. They urged him to return to Athens so they could present him with the information that had since emerged. Upon his return to Athens, he met with detectives who presented their analysis of all digital evidence they retrieved from both him and Caroline. Their findings showed significant discrepancies between the times on their cell phones, biometric watch, camera, and the times reported by Babis previously. Babis alleged the intruders entered the home at about 4:30 a.m. However, the camera's memory card was found to have been removed at 1:20 a.m. Caroline's watch recorded her heart stopping at 4:11 a.m., and his cell phone showed it was in use during the time he would have been gagged and tied. It was clear his version of the events that occurred that night was riddled with inconsistencies. Babis, who had maintained for weeks that his wife was murdered by a trio of foreigners, finally had no choice but to confess he was the one responsible for the elaborate burglary staging and the relentless death of Caroline. For over a month, he played to the hearts of the people and shed crocodile tears, all the while being guilty of this heinous crime. He confessed that he killed her due to a fight they were having that evening, about her wanting to leave him. He then attempted to divert the investigation by staging the crime scene so Lydia would not have to grow up without both of her parents. He told detectives, "That night we had begun arguing from early on. She pushed me and punched me. My judgment became blurred. I strangled her and then I staged the robbery." He would later go into greater details. "I got on top of her so she couldn't hit me as easily. I told her to calm down. She was saying, 'Get up, leave me, go away,' and other swear words which I'd rather not say. Then I took my pillow and I placed it over her head. I had no purpose. There was no logic in my blurred mind at that moment, And when I saw her in profile and understood she was dead from her eyes, which were open, and her pulse, I lost it. It all lasted about 5 minutes. I tried to wake her, rocked her, but it was in vain. I began to weep and pull my hair and go back and forth across the room. From the day I lost Caroline, I lost everything. I lost my life. The state coroner stated that Caroline's official cause of death was suffocation, and she likely suffered a long and agonizing death. On May 16, 2022, about 1 month after his trial began, Charalambos Babis Anagnostopoulos was unanimously found guilty of murder, killing a companion animal, giving false reports and false testimony. He was sentenced to life in prison for Caroline's murder, with parole possible after 27 years, a 10-year sentence and €20,000 fine for the execution of Roxy, and a total of 11.5 years for misleading police in the investigation. Babis was infuriated at the outcome of his trial, believing his sentence should be lighter as it was done while his mind was not clear. I really regret this act. I ruined my life and my family. I wish I could go back in time, but unfortunately I cannot. If I could turn back time, I'd choose Caroline again. Expert witness Alkistis Igoumenaki concluded his sentencing was just. Babis has an absence of sentiment and empathy, but his mind is perfectly capable of understanding the wrongdoing he has done. He suffers from a number of antisocial behavior traits and is also a narcissist. But that is not an excuse for saying that he was not in control when he carried out his crimes. He killed his wife and the mother of his child, without thinking how much the child would suffer from this loss, so the lack of empathy concerns the child as well. We see a man who does not think about the baby. All this contributes to a psychopathic personality. When one commits a murder, it is normal for the perpetrator to try and evade police to avoid persecution for their actions. However, relishing in the eye of the storm is something else entirely. Babis is the true definition of a narcissist. Not only did he impede a murder investigation that he was responsible for, he played in the faces of reporters, the community, and worst of all, in the faces of Caroline's parents. How do you hug, console, and mourn with the mother of a woman you killed? How do you leave your 11-month-old child in the bed with her mother's lifeless body while you tie yourself up and pretend to have fainted? Thankfully, Caroline's parents have been awarded custody of Lydia, and they are raising the now 3-year-old in the Philippines, far away from where her mother's murder took place, and far away from the likes of Babis Anagnostopoulos. If you enjoyed the video, what happens when you mix friendship and large amounts of money? Does friendship or the money rooted in evil prevail? In the case of Taylor Wright, it would be a fusion of deceit, greed, and premeditated murder that would triumph. Taylor Wright, previously known as Taylor Turcotte, was born on April 23, 1984 in South Carolina. It is unclear who Taylor's birth parents were, as she was removed from her home by the Department of Children and Family Services during her adolescent years. She then ended up in a group foster home, which she quickly grew to detest. Taylor confided in John Murchison, a school friend, and told him about the hell she experienced in the group home and her plans of running away. John was understandably concerned about his friend, especially knowing the kind of trouble kids got into when left to fend for themselves and have the streets raise them. He told his mom about her situation and brought up the idea of inviting Taylor to stay with them. Nancy Murchison had always dreamed of having a baby girl, yet she was instead blessed with the births of 2 boys. When she heard about the young girl's horrid circumstance and the life she sadly endured thus far, she swiftly paid a visit to the group home and met with the director. She then took Taylor in as her foster daughter, and the rest was history. Nancy referred to Taylor as her gift from God and was ecstatic to finally have the girl she always wished for. Taylor now had a loving home and was able to flourish in her studies, eventually graduating high school and going on to obtain a degree in criminal justice. One would think someone who dealt with the poor authority within the Department of Children and Family Services and within a group home would stray away from a life in law and authority, but not Taylor. She thrived in this atmosphere, so much so that she decided to enter the police academy in Jacksonville, North Carolina. She was sworn in and became an official member of law enforcement in early 2008 for the Jacksonville Police Department. where she served until 2013. Her quick-witted skills and love for the job led Taylor to land the role of private investigator, a true testimony of her law enforcement expertise and devotion to the profession. In the midst of crime and police work, Taylor found love with a man named Jeff in the fall of 2003. The couple married in 2006 and had one son, Drake, in 2010. Husband Jeffrey David Wright was born on April 17, 1981. He too had a hand in the realm of law, working for the prestigious U.S. Department of Defense. Unfortunately, the crime fighters found themselves experiencing some marital strife, causing them to go through a rocky and lawless divorce, roughly 10 years into their marriage. Not only was the duo battling out a nasty divorce, they also found themselves in a strenuous custody battle over Drake. Though Taylor loved her son and was described as a good mother by friends and family, she woefully lost the initial fight for custodial custody to estranged husband Jeff. As a result of losing custody, she was obliged to begin making child support payments. Taylor immediately appealed both the custody decision and the order to pay child support. In the thick of this uproarious battle, Taylor thought it would be a good idea to wipe out the bank account she shared with her husband on July 12, 2017. Perhaps it was vengeance that led to this doltish decision, or perhaps it was a tactic to throw off the courts and win back her son. Whatever the reasoning, this decision to remove $100,000 from their shared account triggered the events that would result in her sudden and wretched murder. Though going through a depressive episode and not knowing if her appeals would stand in the court of law, she found love again, this time in a woman named Cassandra. She met public school administrator Cassandra Waller via an online dating app, and the two hit it off right away and began a relationship when Taylor moved to Florida. Cassandra proved to be a place of solace for frazzled Taylor, while she continued her legal fight with Jeff. Shortly after their relationship began, confident enough in the way things were progressing between the two, Cassandra asked Taylor to move in with her. She happily agreed and began moving her things into the house little by little, though her life would be taken before she had a chance to complete her move. It was around this time the courts became aware of Taylor's huge bank withdrawal and let it be known it was a violation of her agreement with ex-husband Jeff. If she did not return the money into an appointed escrow account, a warrant would be put out for her arrest, making her plea to win back custody of young Drake even more difficult. Records do not indicate what was done with the vast majority of the money withdrawn. However, a $32,000 check was given to friend and colleague Ashley MacArthur to hide the funds. Other reports allege that an additional $15,000 in cash was given to Ashley along with the check. Ashley MacArthur, who was born on August 22, 1977, worked as a crime scene technician. She was experiencing her own financial struggles and was not the confidant Taylor believed she was. Once the court caught wind of the missing money, Taylor, in fear of her being persecuted, reached out to Ashley to have the money returned. However, anytime the two were supposed to meet up, Ashley would find excuses or cancel at the last moment. Taylor had a scheduled court date for September 7, 2017, but failed to appear as she did not have the money to surrender. The court adjourned to a few days later on September 12, 2017, though she would never make it to that court date either. Getting nervous about what could happen to her and her already strained relationship with her son, she insisted that Ashley stop making excuses and meet up to recover the funds. Text messages later revealed showed a desperate Taylor pleading with Ashley on September 7, 2017. "Please don't be late. They are going to put me in jail if I don't make this deposit. We only have 2 more hours to get to the bank. You almost ready?" Ashley never showed, but reluctantly agreed to meet at Cassandra's home the next day, on the morning of September 8, 2017. Ashley arrived at the home around 9 a.m. as Cassandra was leaving. Cassandra said her goodbyes to Taylor before walking to her car at the end of the driveway, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see her alive. It would be about 1 month from this time before investigators, who had been retracing Taylor's steps from that fateful day, would find her remains. They first came upon a human skull with an apparent bullet hole. The skull was recovered underneath some potting soil and concrete in a farm where her cell phone had pinged on the day of her disappearance. They had also extracted a body from the same rubble which had a necklace that matched a photo of Taylor given to detectives for the purpose of identification. But how did Taylor end up here, with a bullet in her skull, buried in a farm nowhere near her home, nor the bank she was supposed to go to retrieve her money? How does a law enforcement personnel, who is trained to deal with dangerous situations, get murdered in cold blood? It was obvious, without going into many details because it is still being investigated. The remains had been there for a period of time, and they were mostly skeletonized by the time the body was found, Assistant State Attorney Greg Marcil said. Prior to finding Taylor's remains, loved ones remained worried and made speculations as to what was going on. "I'm devastated," Taylor's foster mom Nancy Murchison said. "I need answers. I want to understand. Something had to have happened. She would not have taken off, and so someone had done something horrible to her." She has a little boy. His name is Drake. He's with his dad, but she was texting him every day. They would text back and forth. She hasn't communicated with anyone. All of her friends, all of her family. We're all just puzzled on what has happened to her. She came and spent a couple of days. We had some very nice conversations and she was calm, seemed to be content and happy for the first time in a while. She has been going through a lot of stress from her divorce. My gut tells me that this is not normal behavior, that she wouldn't do this, and that something bad has happened to her and that someone else is involved in her missing. It was on September 8, 2017, around 11 a.m., when Taylor stopped answering Cassandra's text messages, which was extremely peculiar behavior for her. Knowing that Ashley was the last person to have been with Taylor, Cassandra reached out to her for an explanation. Ashley advised her that Taylor was uncontrollably crying and stressed throughout their entire time together, and told her she needed some time to herself to figure things out. According to Ashley, the two went to pick up the check and cash from a safety deposit box at Wells Fargo Bank when Taylor began to express her continued stress about the court case and moving in with Cassandra. To help ease some of her worries, Ashley told Cassandra instead of going directly to the bank, they stopped at a convenience store at around 10 in the morning and purchased Taylor some beer. They then visited East Milton Horse Farm, one of her family's properties, to ride horses and get away from reality for a bit. So we just drove out there, and she was just blowing off steam, I guess, and drinking beer. We were just hanging out. She was a strange girl, stated Ashley to authorities in later interviews. She then claimed the two went to the bank as originally planned, and then back to her house, where Taylor decided she did not want to go back home to Cassandra. She put her money in a duffel bag and ordered an Uber to take her to a bar to continue to drown her sorrows. Ashley said she was fine. She just said that she wanted to go have a beer and that she was going to get an Uber to take her to go have a beer. She alleges this was the last time she saw Taylor. Cassandra was still worried, despite Ashley's accounts of how the day went, but it wasn't until she didn't show up for their dinner plans that she truly became suspicious of her actual whereabouts. She knew Taylor, due to her law enforcement skills and experience, had the ability to disappear without leaving a trace, but it didn't seem to make sense based on recent conversations and where they were at in their relationship. "I don't have any clue what's going on. I just know that something's not right. I was scared," said Cassandra. She then received a text around 7 p.m. from Taylor's phone that read, "I'll call you later. I'm not angry with you and I should have called, but I just needed to think. I'm trying to get my life organized and on track." Though she was initially happy to finally hear from her, she was wary of the text, as it did not sound like something she would say. She begged her to come home, but to no avail. Around midnight, Ashley sent her a screenshot of a text, supposedly from Taylor, that said Court and Cassandra were stressing her out. But Cassandra knew that she was not the cause of any stress, as they were just beginning a new journey in their lives together. It was not just Cassandra who became concerned about Taylor. Taylor's son Drake had also been trying to get in contact with his mother, but received no replies. Regardless of what Taylor was going through at any given moment, she never rejected her son's calls or ignored his texts. This was completely out of character for her, so Cassandra decided to alert authorities. Upon going to the police station, they brushed off her worries and told her to contact ex-husband Jeff. They believed she may have left for North Carolina to be with her son. When Cassandra reached out to Jeff, he too said that he had not heard from Taylor. The last time he saw Taylor was when she traveled to Jacksonville, North Carolina, to visit Drake on August 13, 2017. He had tried and failed to get in touch with her after his son made it known that she was not replying, which was odd. With nowhere else to turn, Cassandra decided to check in with hospitals in the area, thinking she may have gotten into an accident or some type of trouble, as Ashley told her she had a duffel bag full of money and had gone on to drink at a bar. By the end of the week, and still no word from Taylor, she was at her wit's end and made her way back to the police station. They took Cassandra more seriously this time around and opened a missing persons case. They immediately reached out to Ashley, who was the last known person to see Taylor. Ashley again reiterated that Taylor showed signs of extreme despair, and she believed she took the money and ran in order to avoid legal trouble and get away from Cassandra. Ashley told authorities, "I don't believe Taylor's been harmed. I think Taylor is doing what Taylor does, but I don't know, you know. She's always come across as being tough. She's always carrying weapons, whether it's knives or guns or whatever. She's not an easy target." Detectives ruled out Ashley as a suspect, though kept her on the back burner as a person of interest. They then moved suspicions onto Jeff, as they were made aware of the contentious legal tussle they were going through. Jeff, who had since remarried, told detectives he was out of town during the time of her disappearance. His alibi quickly checked out, and investigators turned their attention back to Ashley. Phone records from both Ashley and Taylor were retrieved, and they noticed the cell phone pings did not match with the story Ashley told Cassandra and detectives. While they did visit one of Ashley's family properties, it was not the horse farm as originally reported, but a farm on Britt Road near Beulah Road, where Taylor's body had been found. They also found that Ashley never had a safety deposit box at Wells Fargo, or any bank for that matter. Uber was also contacted, and Taylor's account had not been used in months. The duffel bag she claimed Taylor used to store her money was later found by Cassandra in her home, along with the weapons she claimed she always carried. Ashley's husband Zach had also been questioned, and it was discovered due to his wife having extramarital affairs. He installed a tracking device on her vehicle. GPS records showed Ashley's entire ordeal of how the day went was completely false. Surveillance cameras were also reviewed at the various stops Ashley made for the day. Surveillance footage from one store showed her purchasing soil and concrete, which is what Taylor was coincidentally buried underneath. For 42 days, Ashley had lied over and over again to Taylor's family, friends, girlfriend, and to detectives. Ashley never admitted guilt to the murder of her best friend and colleague, though the evidence against her was insurmountable. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in late October 2017. Her trial did not commence until 2 years later in 2019, where several acquaintances of both parties testified. One local bartender and friend of Ashley, Audrey Warren, admitted to authorities that Ashley had indeed been brainstorming on how to murder Taylor the evening before she disappeared. She said that she was going to put cocaine in Taylor's beer. She said that she put it in her beer, but Taylor spit it out because she said it tasted sour. Another friend, Audrey Wheeler, stated Ashley told her, "She said this world would be better if Taylor wasn't here, and she wasn't a good person. She then said that she was too small to hurt anybody, so she'd just shoot them." Ashley's lover, Brandon Beatty, was also tracked down for the trial, where he testified that not only had Ashley used the money Taylor entrusted her with to pay off her credit card debts, she also used the money to fund his business and hobbies. After a brief 4-day trial, the jurors began deliberations on Friday, October 30th, 2019 around 11 a.m. and returned with their verdict just 3 hours later. The jury found Ashley MacArthur guilty of first-degree premeditated murder with a firearm. Ashley was sentenced to a mandatory minimum life term in prison. She did not believe that this punishment was fair, as the text messages, phone records, and character witness statements used as evidence should not have been allowed to be used against her. After going through much red tape and finally getting her appeal to be heard, once again in April 2021, the Florida First District Court of Appeal maintained that she was guilty and deserving of her conviction and life sentence. Taylor's mom, Nancy, commented on the case and verdict. "Taylor was a great mother, really loved her. She loved her family and her brothers, and she loved me. Ashley's a horrible, evil person, and quite frankly, I hope she rots in hell." Cassandra also made statements. "Family, friends, and myself are grieving the loss of Taylor. Taylor was outgoing and kind to anyone she met and knew. She was compassionate, charismatic, funny, and so much more. She made everyone smile wherever she went. When you first met her, she made you feel like she's known you your entire life, or I'm sure you had at least one commonality. Taylor was just there for so many over her lifetime in a plethora of ways. Her heart was one of the biggest I have ever seen someone have, one of the many reasons why she was loved so much. Some say friends are one of the most valuable assets we can obtain in a lifetime. But what happens when so-called friends have ulterior motives? What happens when friends take advantage during one of the most difficult periods of your life? What happens when they choose to betray you and steal from you? Unfortunately for Taylor Wright, that answer was death and destruction. Ashley spent that money on herself and her extramarital lover, not caring what that would mean for Taylor or even her son. Perhaps she didn't think she'd ask for the money back so soon, or perhaps the plan was to kill her all along.